Chapter 6:11. It could be said that among the 7 great clans of the previous generation, the enraged master was a powerful character who was ranked in the top 3. The way he handled things was also extremely domineering. Even when the Serene Shrine had internal strife 20 years ago, and the Emperor had personally ordered him to come out and help wipe out the evil cult, he had ignored it. He was an extremely powerful character who dared to go up against the Netherworld. The enraged lion snorted coldly and said, "If it wasn't because of the help from an outsider this time around, our Tianmen clan would have had someone sit on our necks and shit on us." Outsider? Just then, the first prince walked in slowly from outside. His expression was grim, and there seemed to be countless schemes flashing in his eyes. When everyone from the Tianmen clan saw the first prince appear, they all stood up. Various power waves appeared, displaying an extreme wariness. There was no other way about it. As a member of the Krieg royal family, the first prince had joined forces over the past few months and controlled countless powers in the 8 great regions. He had also attained the divine level and single-handedly oversaw the Xingwu region, suppressing the Myriad Stars Palace and the Full Moon Shrine, who both had divine-level experts. His prestige was like the sun in the sky. How could the arrival of a character who was in the limelight not raise the Tianmen clan's wariness? During the battle at the Hades Vault, the first prince's subordinate, the Dark Knight, had been refined to death by Rona using the powers of the Hades Vault. His clone had been crushed by Fang Xinjian, and the Hell's white bone armor had been snatched away. The first prince had suffered great losses. However, it was also because of this defeat that the first prince seemed to have become even more profound and unfathomable. He gave off an unfathomable feeling. The Tianmen clan's head said solemnly, "George Krieg, your Krieg royal family, has never had much contact with our 7 great clans. What are you here for this time around? Could it be that you want to unify our 7 great clans?" The first prince smiled and ignored the other party's question. He merely said, "I happen to know how Rona died, so I've come to inform Senior Enraged Lion so that the Tianmen clan won't be taken advantage of by vile people." Hearing what the first prince said, the Tianmen clan's head narrowed his gaze and said, "How do we know if what you said is true or not?" The enraged lion raised his walking stick, patted the ground, and said, "All right, George. Stop keeping them in suspense. Tell them everything you know." "As Senior wishes." After saying that, the first prince sent a message into everyone's sea of consciousness. It was a video message from the first prince's point of view. The content was the scene where he personally witnessed Fang Xinjian killing Rona after exiting the Hades Vault. Looking at this scene in his mind, the eyes of the Tianmen clan's head almost popped out. "How dare you? Who is this person? Who was he? I'm going to tear him to pieces." The first prince said calmly, "He is Fang Xinjian, the genius who is currently in the limelight within the empire." Fang Xinjian? The eyes of the Tianmen clan's head narrowed slightly. That Fang Xinjian who invented the rebirth sword technique and later killed one of Xia's clones? A country bumpkin dares to oppose our Tianmen clan. I'll let him know what true regret is. At the side, the enraged lion had been in seclusion all year round, so he was not informed of the news. Upon hearing this, he asked directly, "Fang Xinjian? Who was that? Which faction is he from?" The Tianmen clan's head told him about Fang Xinjian's deed. After hearing it, the enraged lion let out a cold snort, and the killing intent in his eyes seemed to have condensed into a material form. Even the surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped. No sect or clan. Someone from Cursed City? Not even an aristocrat? Then isn't he just a country bumpkin? To think that a country bumpkin like him would dare to kill Rona? Audacious, really audacious. I'll head to the Great Western region right now. I'm going to skin this B***starred alive, pull out his tendons, and drown him in a cesspool. With that, the enraged lion glared at the first prince and said, "He's a subject of your royal family. You can't be thinking of supporting him, right?" Of course, I won't be willing to let off a traitor who disregards the laws of the royal family, as well as the great orthodoxy. The first prince's eyes drooped slightly as he said calmly. The first prince narrowed his eyes and said calmly, however, "This little thief has already matured. I'm afraid it won't be easy for Senior Enraged Lion to suppress him." Matured? The enraged lion chuckled coldly, and waves of power emerged from his body like bubbles. Streams of platinum-colored ripples appeared all over his body. These ripples condensed in the air and circled around his back, turning into countless pavilions, terraces, and towers. Countless heavenly soldiers and generals could even breathe and have heartbeats, as if they were alive. The power condensed from his martial will affected the air in the real world. At the sight of this scene, the first prince's eyes lit up slightly. "Congratulations, Senior Enraged Lion. You've finally attained the divine level." A hint of pride flashed on the enraged lion's face. "It's just that I've lived long enough and managed to survive until the world's metamorphosis, thus obtaining the memories of my predecessors. I can't compare to youngsters like you who have endless potential. But to deal with that B*****, divine level abilities should be sufficient, right? Are you still going to stop me?" The first prince fell silent for a moment before sighing and saying, "Senior, you might not know this yet, but this thief's luck is extremely good. After snatching the legacy of the mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor, he has already attained the divine level. A few days ago, he even killed the 8 directional Crimson Dragons Xia in the Great Western Region's Regional Academy. At that time, Xia had already attained the 2nd tier of the divine level." The moment he said this, the entire place fell silent. Even the Tianmen clan's head revealed an astonished expression. A 1st-tier divine-level expert had killed a 2nd-tier divine-level expert. Each of these words was like a bomb, seething incessantly in everyone's consciousness. The enraged lion could not help but frown. He nodded and said, "First tier of the divine level? Xia has been here before, and I've had an exchange of martial arts with him. This person's will is as tough as a demon's, and he also has an innate bestial nature. He has been progressing valiantly, and I'm not surprised that he has attained the 2nd tier of the divine level. However, since Fang Xinjian has attained the divine level and even killed Xia, then we mustn't underestimate him. There aren't many people in history who can kill a 2nd-tier divine level expert while being at the 1st tier of the divine level." He then looked at the first prince and said, "We mustn't underestimate a person like this either." Upon hearing of Fang Xinjian's latest battle achievements, this top-notch character from the 7 great clans immediately stopped underestimating him. He looked at the first prince and said, "In that case, does your highness want to join forces with us?" "Everyone has the right to punish rebels and traitors," the first prince said calmly. The first prince said calmly, 7 days later, "I'll be getting married to the Full Moon Shrine's Miss Lan Yu. This thief has been wanting to take revenge on me for bullying him in the past. He'll probably come and cause trouble at that time. We can set up an ambush. The 3 great influences will attack together and suppress him completely." "Full Moon Shrine's Lan Yu?" Hearing this, the enraged lion narrowed his eyes. "That's the granddaughter of that old hag, Blue Sacred Moonlight, right? She's marrying you?" "That's right. Senior Blue Sacred Moonlight has already agreed to submit to the Empire. This marriage alliance is just the beginning." Hearing this news, endless waves stirred up in the enraged lion's heart. The Blue Sacred Moonlight has always been someone who won't take action until there's an incentive. To think that the first prince can get her to join forces with us! What on earth does the Krieg royal family have in their hands? The enraged lion nodded and said, "Since even the Blue Sacred Moonlight has joined forces, our Tianmen clan will naturally not back down. This time around, the 3 of us will join forces and take care of that Fang Xinjian completely." Thinking of how Fang Xinjian had been improving at such a rapid pace, there must have been some fortuitous encounters and secret The enraged lion's heart revealed waves of greed. Chapter 6:12. A few days later, in the regional academy's sacred land, Fang Xinjian played with the 4 long swords floating in midair before him. They were another 4 long swords made from his ribs. He could be considered a divine-level expert, but these 4 long swords could not be considered divine remains equipment. It was because divine remains equipment were made from the remains of divine-level experts, and each of the remains was not just a matter of materials. They also contained a large portion of the power and essence left behind by divine-level experts after their death. However, it was impossible for Fang Xinjian to split up his own power and the essence of his physical body to create divine remains equipment. That would be akin to weakening himself to create equipment. Therefore, he had only casually condensed 4 longswords to temporarily assist him in setting up the celestial eradication sword formation. The 4 longswords floated around Fang Xinjian in different directions, while Head of Department James, Governor Devitt, Black Dragon King Wang Huan, and Tyron stood in 4 different directions around Fang Xinjian. Head of Department James said, "Xinjian, we're here." Fang Xinjian said calmly, "There's no need for you guys to have any reservations. Just go all out." Governor Devitt smiled as well. "Then we'll make our move. We'll also try out the prowess of a divine-level expert." The 4 of them could be said to be the strongest under Fang Xinjian. This was especially so since Tyrant was already at Tier 4 of the divine level and could strive to attain the divine level at any time. Right now, they were joining forces to attack. The weather immediately changed, and the world trembled. Waves of ice, gravity, water vapor, and air currents smashed out toward Fang Xinjian. The powers of the 4 seemed to have merged into one, circling around Fang Xinjian, then contracting and crushing him. Looking at the 4's joint attacks, Fang Xinjian raised his sword fingers. Light pursuit. In that instant, one of the 4 long swords emitted a bright light, bringing along a series of illusions. In an instant, it split into a myriad, bringing along a seething long river of sword cheese, slashing out toward the 4 of them. Bang 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 bang! A series of explosions rang out as the sword chi river swept through the bodies of the 4 of them. The ice was slashed apart, the gravity was neutralized, the water vapor was blasted apart, and the chi force was destroyed. The 4 of them let out muffled grunts as they retreated. Each of their feet stomped on the ground, leaving behind huge footprints. The ground cracked, causing earthquakes of magnitude 3 to 4. It was clear how much power the 4 of them had received. Moreover, just as the repercussions from the battle between the 4 of them were about to spill out, this power, which could destroy the entire regional academy, was immediately neutralized by the stacking layers of sword cheese in the void space, not harming the environment in the slightest. The Black Dragon King's expression changed drastically. Although he already knew that Fang Xinjian was very powerful, he was still surprised to see that he was able to break through the joint attack of the 4 of them with a single sword strike. In fact, he felt that if Fang Xinjian had not held back, he would have been able to kill all of them. My world annihilation tide can even destroy a city. Now that I've joined hands with the other 3, we can't even block a single sword from him? Head of Department James exhaled intensely. He stared at Fang Xinjian and asked, "Xinjian, tell us the truth. How powerful are you right now? Even Xia was killed by you with a single sword attack, unable to retaliate at all. We'll only know who the victor is after we fight." Fang Xinjian said calmly, "However, ordinary Tier 2 divine-level experts won't be a match for me in a head-on battle. If it's a long-distance battle, we'll only know after we fight." As Fang Xinjian spoke, he played with the 4 long swords in front of him. The 4 long swords flew up and down, and streams of sword cheese continued to move about between the long swords. It was as if the entire world had an inexplicable connection with the 4 longsword. After Fang Xinjian merged the sword formation with the sword realm, the newly formed sword formation was known as the Celestial Eradication Sword Formation. under the encompassing of the celestial eradication sword formation and the sword realm's abilities, it could draw out the energies of all physical particles and ether particles within a range of 100,000 meters. Then, with the 4 longswords as the center, it could release the attacks of the 4 sword techniques: infiltrating void, light pursuit, all-conquering, and instant. It could also distort space, killing people without a trace and slashing enemies 10,000 meters away. It could also destroy cities, topple mountains, and overturn seas. Its prowess far surpassed that of the sword realm or the sword formation alone. However, it was a pity that the quality of the 4 longswords was insufficient. There was a limit to how long the celestial eradication sword formation could last. It could only last for a few minutes, and one would have to rest for a period of time before it could be performed again. In the distance, Lilia, Anderson, Zhou Xingwen, and even Rhoda had come to observe this spar. Seeing how Fang Xinjian had defeated the 4 experts with a single sword attack, their countenances were all different. Lilia and Zhou Xingwen were filled with fervent admiration and excitement, while Fang Xinjian felt proud of his powerful abilities. Anderson and Rhoda were clearly disappointed. Faced with Fang Xinjian's rapid increase in abilities, they felt that they would never be able to catch up to him. Anderson sighed and said, "Fang Xinjian was just an ordinary apprentice 2 years ago. To think that in just 2 years, he has grown to become a divine-level expert and even killed Xia, who had made a name for himself many years ago. Who would have expected this?" Governor Devitt walked up to Fang Xinjian and asked, "Xinjian, His Majesty's envoy has been here for 2 days. Are you still not going to meet him?" "Let him leave," Fang Xinjian said casually. "I'll head to the imperial capital myself. There's no need for them to fetch me." At the next moment, Fang Xinjian turned his gaze toward the northwest, in the direction of the Empire's Xingwu region. It was also the region where the first prince was currently at. Zhou Xingwen said, "Sir, it'll be the first Prince and Lan Yu's wedding in another 3 days. Should we send someone over?" The wedding between the Empire's first prince and the Blue Sacred Moonlight's granddaughter, Lan Yu, was like a magnitude 10 earthquake, shocking the entire empire. The impact it brought could be said to be unprecedented. In an instant, the first prince's prestige was pushed to an unprecedented level. After all, after the marriage, the Blue Sacred Moonlight would be considered to be part of the empire, and the Myriad Stars Palace would be the only one left in the Xingwu region. The 8-directional Crimson Dragon would be disbanded, and Xia would be killed by Fang Xinjian. With that, among the empire's divine-level experts, only the Holy Orison and the Great River Alliance's Fist Emperor were left. After accomplishing all these, the first prince's prestige was like the sun in the sky. A strange glow flashed in Fang Xinjian's eyes. He suddenly stood up and thought to himself, "I'll make a trip to the Xingwu region tomorrow. It's time to settle the matter with the first prince. There's no need to send anyone. I'll make the trip myself." At the next moment, Fang Xinjian's silhouette flashed slightly, and he returned to a room. In the room, the 4th prince had already opened his eyes. Philip stood next to him, revealing a hint of rejoice. When the 4th prince saw Fang Xinjian, he said directly, "Thank you, Xinjian. If it wasn't for you, I'd have died for sure. I didn't expect the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's legacy to be so dangerous. If one isn't a divine-level expert, they probably won't be able to accept this legacy." The 4th prince had fallen into a coma because his body was unable to accept the endlessly expanding ghost realm in his mind. Therefore, after Fang Xinjian entered the 4th prince's consciousness, he set up a sword formation with his own sword intent, continuously drawing out the power of ether particles and slashing away the excess memories and information fragments in the 4th prince's mind. This allowed the 4th prince to slowly get used to the existence of the ghost realm in his mind as his abilities improve. "It's good that you're awake." Fang Xinjian looked at the 4th prince and said, "How much of the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's legacy is left?" Chapter 6:13. A total of 7 sets of mystic abyss sword technique. All of them are here. The fourth prince nodded, unable to hide the joy in his eyes. 7 sword arts geniuses that the mystic abyss heavenly emperor has personally nurtured. Their memories sit in the center of the ghost world in my mind, and they can teach me sword arts at any time. They can also defend my consciousness. As for the other things, they're all here. With that, the fourth prince took out a jade-green longsword with a strange shape with 6 facets. It was the Sunluo 6 Heavens sword that they had gone through a lot of trouble to obtain. As the fourth prince's will was channeled into the Sunluo 6 Heavens sword, a jade-green door appeared before Fang Xinjian. The door then opened and a small world appeared before everyone's eyes. The fourth prince said, "The Sunluo 6 Heavens sword is a level 34 divine remains equipment. However, the most amazing thing about it is not its destructive prowess but the space it can create. The size of the space is about half the size of the regional academy, and it's also the crux to suppressing the Hades vault." As they spoke, the fourth prince had already led Philip and Fang Xinjian into the space of the Sunluo 6 Heavens sword. In the entire space, the ground under their feet and the sky above their heads were covered by jade-green air current. They did not look like real land and sky, but they still gave off the feeling that they were standing on solid ground. They even emitted patches of white light, giving off the feeling that it was broad daylight outside. Lifting their heads, they could see countless palaces that were connected together in the entire space. They were all made of jade and jadeite, looking extremely dazzling. The space created by a divine-level expert was clearly different from the gates of the netherworld. This place was almost like a real small world. Time did not stop, and it could also take in living creatures. The gates of the netherworld could not take in living creatures, and there was no flow of time inside either. The fourth prince, Fang Xinjian, and Philip flew around the entire space. When Philip saw this extravagant palace, he also wore an astonished expression. As the fourth prince walked, he introduced, "This is the medicinal herb room. It contains precious medicinal herbs that the Jade dynasty has spent over 10 years to gather." Philip scanned the palace next to him with his martial will. The more he scanned, the more astonished he was. 9 colored sunlight vines, 7 flames flowers, half giant's blood? There were also thunder gems, Tianyuan great herbs, and so many precious herbs. The Tianyuan great medicine had been lost for a long time. Who would have thought that the Jade dynasty would still be able to collect it? It said that even if a divine-level expert were to consume this heavenly origin great medicine, their physique would be strengthened, their brains' calculative abilities strengthened, and their cultivation increased. Next, the fourth prince pointed to another palace with soaring killing intent, occasional flashes of sword light, and battle cries ringing out. "This is the weapons hall. It has a large number of weapons forged by the Jade dynasty's top craftsmen," the fourth prince said. Fang Xinjian scanned them with his sword intent. There was a total of 500 weapons, and all of them were superior divine weapons. The 2 strongest longswords emitted waves of terrifying waves. They were both divine remains equipment. It was not just weapons. Other than the 500 longswords, there were also 500 sets of armor. They were painted in an emerald green color and shone with mysterious print. All of them were level 29 superior divine weapons. Philip was astonished. Could this be the legendary top-notch armor of the Jade dynasty, the Mayan death god armor? It said that these sets of armor were all worn by the mystic abyss heavenly emperor's imperial guards. They were made from dragon blood and dragon tendons as the raw materials, together with the powder ground from the remains of demigods. After wearing each set, even ordinary people will be able to soar into the sky, tunnel into the ground, and break through sound barriers. They will also be impervious to water and fire, as well as invulnerable to blades and spears. To think that there are 500 sets of them left behind here," he said with an astonished expression. "What a great deal! Right now, even the Empire probably won't be able to gather so many sets of superior divine weapons. If there are 500 conferred knights wearing these 500 sets of Mayan death god armor, they'll be able to go up against a Tier 1 or even 2 divine level expert. The fourth prince shook his head. Great treasures can't be given to others easily. It's not easy to find 500 loyal conferred knights. There are only 5,000 conferred knights in the entire empire. On the other hand, Fang Xinjian entered the weaponry hall and walked into the deepest part. With each step he took, the long swords of the superior divine weapons in the surroundings all trembled slightly. It was as if they were subjects who had met their king. They were agitated and nervous, yet they also showed signs of submission. Fang Xinjian finally reached the deepest part of the weaponry hall. 2 long swords, one red and one green, were quietly floating there. The fourth prince stood behind Fang Xinjian and said, "These are the Jade Fire Divine Swords and Sky Divine Swords personally created by the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor. They've been infused with the sword intents of the 6 Heaven-Soaring Swords and the 6 Transmigration Sword. They can assist the user in performing these 2 sword techniques." The Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor had a total of 7 sword techniques. The 6 heaven-soaring swords which the fourth prince had imparted to him were the main principles, and the remaining 6 sword techniques were not weak either. The 6 transmigration formation, which the Hades ghost dragon had performed, originated from the 6 transmigration sword. Hearing that, Fang Xinjian nodded and reached out to grab a longsword that was completely jade green in color. The moment the longsword entered his hand, a gush of cold will swept through his mind. Jade Fire Longsword, a level 30 divine remains equipment? With the sword intents of the 6 heaven-soaring swords channeled into it, the prowess of the 6 heaven-soaring swords when performed with this longsword will at least double. Fang Xinjian shook his head. It's a pity that this longsword doesn't seem to be the weapon that the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor used in battle, right? That's of course, the fourth prince said. For existences like them, ordinary divine remains equipment are no longer of much use. Moreover, they would have to use their own weapons. It'd be good even if they were to leave them for their descendants to use. How could they have hidden them away for several thousand or tens of thousands of years, leaving them for a junior that they don't know? The Hades Vault is just some of their benevolence, some preparations they made for the future of mankind. Philip nodded. It's just that we don't know where the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's descendants are, and if they have the weapons that he used back then. Fang Xinjian looked at the 2 longswords before him. Although the prowess of these 2 longswords was average, the sword intents in them had been left behind by the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor. Right now, Fang Xinjian was still unable to get rid of them, so he had no way of using these 2 longswords to set up the Celestial Eradication Sword formation. From a certain perspective, the prowess of these 2 longswords was average. However, with the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's sword intents in them, it was almost impossible to destroy them at this stage. Fang Xinjian then followed the fourth prince to look around. In the entire space of the Sunluo 6 Heavens sword, there were all sorts of medicinal herbs, weapons, armors, heavenly and earthly treasures, gold and gemstones, and even rations, clothes, wood, metals, and many other things. It was like a safe house at the end of the world. The fourth prince stood before the door of the space, and said with a sincere expression, "Xinjian, what do you think of these things? They're not bad, but to a divine-level expert, they don't seem to have much of an improvement." Fang Xinjian said, "To me, the most important thing is still the sword technique legacy in the ghost realm in your mind." Chapter 6:14. Indeed. The fourth prince said, "In the Sunluo 6 Heaven sword space, there are all sorts of things that can be used to equip and develop one's influence. However, there's very little for your improvement." A hint of determination flashed in his eyes as he said, "Xinjian, I plan to use the equipment inside to arm the Great Western Region Regional Academy." Fang Xinjian looked at him and said, You want to join hands with me and the second prince. That's right. I like second brother's policies. Now that I have your help, I believe that you will succeed in the end. The fourth prince said, I'm a believer of the God of universal truth, and the throne has never been mine to begin with. There aren't many things in the Sunluo Six Heavens sword that are useful to me. I can take out most of them and give them to the regional academy to increase your powers. Fang Xinjian looked toward Philip, who nodded and said in agreement, I also think that it's feasible. Xinjian, you're now the leader on our side. We trust both your abilities and your character. We're also familiar with the second prince's character. It'll be the best outcome if you guys win against the first prince and the others. Seeing that the two of them had agreed, Fang Xinjian did not put on airs and called Governor Devitt, head of Department James, Tyrant, the Dark Dragon King, as well as Lilia, Anderson, Zhou Xingwen, Ferdinand, Robert, Anthony, Rhoda, and the others. They were basically Fang Xinjian's direct subordinate. The moment they entered the space of the Sunluo Six Heavens sword, they were shocked. Head of Department James opened his mouth wide, stomped hard on the ground where the Sunluo Six Heavens sword was and said, This is a space created by a divine-level expert? Fang Xinjian beckoned with his hand, and the two longswords, Jade Fire and Long Sky, flew into James's and Devitt's hands. The two of them looked at the longswords in their hands and exclaimed in surprise, Divine Remains equipment? That's right. These two longswords are level 30 Divine Remains equipment, and 2 streams of the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's sword intents have been channeled into them. They are extremely profound. After learning the 6 heaven-soaring swords and the 6 transmigration swords, you'll be able to hold your ground even against a divine-level expert. The fourth prince said with a smile. Following which, Philip grabbed an entire row of Mayan death god armor and placed it in front of everyone. Tyrant walked up and looked at the armor in astonishment. This is the Mayan death god armor forged by the Jade Dynasty? How could there be so many? Any one of them is 10 times more powerful than the Abyssal Doomsday armor. Not bad. Fang Xinjian said, the situation is getting more and more chaotic. We'll have to face many enemies in the future. Each of you will have a set to increase your combat power. As he spoke, he waved his hand and a row of Mayan death god armor flew towards everyone. It was as if they were alive, directly covering everyone's skin. With a slight movement they disappeared. Usually they were like human skin, nourishing the body and replenishing blood. At critical moments, it could transform into armor to protect the cultivator. With a move of her body, Lilia leaped up to a height of 100 meters in the air. Following that, her entire body was wrapped up in a jade-green armor. The mysterious patterns on the surface of the armor emitted a faint fluorescent light, and the glow of many supporting force fields continued to shine on her body. Then with a move of her body, she instantly tore through the air and circled in the sky at 30 times the speed of sound. Amazing, Lilia said in astonishment. There's no remnant consciousness in this armor? I can feel an endless stream of power being channeled into my body. The fourth prince said, the remnant consciousness in the Mayan death god armor has long been wiped out by the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor. There's only pure power available for use. Moreover, they were created by the Jade Dynasty by gathering all the powers in the world, using the blood and tendons of dragons, as well as the remains of demigods. When conferred knights wear them, they'll be able to fly at several tens of times the speed of sound. Their powers will be able to pierce through mountains, and their defense will be at the pinnacle of level 29. They can also absorb the powers of ether particles at any time to recover. Everyone put on the Mayan death god armor. Even the weakest first transition knights like Anthony and Ferdinand instantly possessed the powers of level 29 conferred knight. It was just that they were not comparable to demigods. 4 people like head of department James and Governor Devitt, their battle prowess had doubled. However, as Tyrant was too strong to begin with, he did not get much stronger after wearing it. The fourth prince then brought everyone to the place where the medicinal herbs were stored and said, "You guys can consume the medicinal herbs here. There are all sorts of medicinal herbs that can cleanse the body and strengthen the will." Philip said, "It takes time to transform physical matter into battle prowess. You guys can cultivate in the Sunluo 6 Heavens sword space. You'll probably be able to improve tremendously after 1 to 2 months." Fang Shijian nodded. With the original 5 levels of the mystical prince, in addition to the items in the Sunluo 6 Heavens sword, everyone's abilities would increase tremendously. After making arrangements for everyone's cultivation, Fang Shijian and the fourth prince returned to the sacred land, planning to receive the legacy of the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's other 6 sword techniques from the Ghost Realm in the fourth prince's mind. The Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's sword techniques used the 6 heaven soaring swords as the core, while the other 6 sword techniques were side branches. All of them were unrivaled sword techniques that attacked the will. Furthermore, other than these 6 sword techniques, the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor also had an understanding of Tier 10 of the divine level. This was something that Fang Shijian needed. After all, after reaching level 30 and Tier 1 of the divine level, Fang Shijian was a little lost about his cultivation. It was because, other than some introductory information from the Mountainous Seas Book of the Way, he knew nothing else. After all, the regional academy did not have any cultivation methods for those after the divine level. However, the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor had helped Fang Shijian to make up for this. First, the cultivation methods for the 6 sword techniques gushed into Fang Shijian's mind and consciousness. All sorts of sword techniques that could erase one's memories, shake one's will, and crush one's spirit entered Fang Shijian's mind one after another. Now that he had transitioned into the Eternal Sword Seigneur and possessed the ability of sword prowess, Fang Shijian would be able to reach level 50 immediately after learning any sword technique. Almost 20 minutes later, the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's remaining 6 sword techniques had all reached level 50. He then combined them into the 5 god-slaying swords. The original 5 god-slaying swords mainly focused on physical destruction. Now that it had been integrated with the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's sword techniques, there was a netherworld samsara concept in the deathly sword intent. Wherever Fang Shijian's deathly sword intent passed by, it would erase one's will, memories, and spirit, bringing with it an unrivaled destructive prowess toward one's martial will. Sensing the powerful killing prowess of the new 5 god-slaying swords, which possessed both mental and physical attributes, Fang Shijian decided to change its name to the Celestial Eradication 4 Swords. Right now, the level 50 Celestial Eradication sword technique allowed Fang Shijian's abilities to increase tremendously once again. Coupled with the Celestial Eradication sword formation, the Celestial Eradication 4 swords allowed him to possess an unrivaled destructive prowess. Therefore, Fang Shijian then looked at the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's summary of the cultivation path for Tier 10 of the divine level. Chapter 6:15. The first tier of the divine level allows the consciousness to materialize. The will is power and can interfere with the physical world. The second tier of the divine level allows the will to transform into flesh and blood. Unless the consciousness is destroyed, the physical body will be almost indestructible. The third tier of the divine level allows the physical body and strength to be forged directly from ether particles, connecting with all the ether particles in the world. The energy will be endless, and the strength will almost never be depleted. The fourth tier of the divine level allows the consciousness to receive future information from ether particles, and the sudden inspiration allows one to sense fortune and misfortune. The first 4 tiers of the divine level were summarized by Fang Shijian from the Mountainous Sea Dynasty's Mountainous Seas Book of the Way. The Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's Legacy also described the next few tiers. The 5th tier of the divine level allows one to distort space, fold space, stretch space, open up a small world, and carry out attacks and defenses in space. The sixth tier of the divine level allows one to traverse space, leap through space, move at will, and be omnipresent. Distance is no longer a restriction. The seventh tier of the divine level allows one to sense time and accelerate time. It was a pity that the mystic abyss heavenly emperor had only reached the seventh tier of the divine level. Although he guessed that the eighth and ninth tiers should still be related to the control of time, he had not truly reached them. It was just a guess. However, the fifth, sixth, and seventh tiers were still too far away for Fang Xinjian. Right now, what was of the greatest help to Fang Xinjian was still the cultivation path of the first tier of the divine level. The advancement to the divine level required one to pass through the nine-tiered heavens. This was an extreme test of one's martial will. Therefore, the cultivation of each tier of the divine level required the strengthening of one's martial will. The first tier of the divine level was the materialization of one's martial will. Since it was a materialized existence, it would have a physical structure. It was just like how coal, cinder, and diamond were completely different in terms of toughness. Therefore, the first tier of the divine level required one to condense the form of one's martial will. For example, the first prince's Yama sacred physique. After the martial will was condensed, its toughness would increase tremendously. Only then would one have the chance to pass through the first tier of the nine-tiered heavens and advance to the second tier of the divine level. Fang Xinjian relied on the eternal sword seigneur's ability and the sword formation to form the celestial eradication sword formation, which had the power to crush those at the second tier of the divine level. However, his martial will and deathly sword intent were still not strong enough. It was only after condensing a special structure that one's martial will would become increasingly stronger. It could even overturn rivers and seas, grasping space and controlling time. The method the mystic abyss heavenly emperor used to condense his martial will was the Sunluo Six Heavens sword physique. The Sunluo Six Heavens sword was a divine weapon created by imitating this sword body. However, in essence, this sword physique was still not perfect enough. Therefore, the mystic abyss heavenly emperor stopped at tier 7 of the divine level in the end. Fang Xinjian thought to himself, "My current battle prowess mainly relies on the celestial eradication sword formation after the sword realm and the sword formation are combined. I'm not in a hurry to condense my martial will. It's best for me to collect a few more martial will condensing methods to build up my foundation and expand my potential." After advancing to the deity level, his strength was completely different from before. Nurturing techniques, training techniques, amassing techniques, and killing techniques had all changed. All that was left were the killing techniques used to attack and kill enemies, and the nurturing techniques used to train one's martial will and increase one's strength. The mystic abyss heavenly emperor's Sunluo Six Heavens sword physique was a nurturing technique, while Fang Xinjian's celestial eradication sword formation was a killing technique. As for training techniques, amassing techniques waves, and mental cultivation methods, as the will of a divine level expert had surpassed the physical body, they were no longer of much help. Even after advancing to the divine level, Fang Xinjian felt that his negative emotions had been completely suppressed by his martial will, and he was almost not affected at all. At the divine level, the physical body was only a support, and the martial will was the main direction of cultivation. At this realm, the cultivation path was mainly to increase the power of one's martial will, and then use the abilities of the various realms that one had obtained to complement one's killing techniques, continuously increasing the prowess of the killing technique. As for the other specialty seeds, physical particles, body's toughness, ether organs, brain regeneration, and so on, they had all been converted into the power of one's martial will in the process of striving for the divine level. Fang Xinjian looked at his stats window. It had completely changed into the stats window that only divine level experts would have. Some of the specialties, waves, and so on had disappeared, but there was an additional attribute for his martial will. Name Fang Xinjian, age 19, occupation Eternal Sword Senior level, 30 strength, 426 agility, 424 reaction, 329 endurance, 310 flexibility, 309 martial will, 800 skills, techniques, sword prowess, sword force, level 50 celestial eradication, sword formation, level 50 celestial eradication, 4 swords. The martial will was the attribute that represented the strength of one's martial will. 800 points represented the strength of one's martial will, which meant that one's degree of interference toward the physical world was equivalent to the damage that a cultivator with 800 points in strength, agility, reaction, endurance, and flexibility could do to the physical world. This was the stats window of a divine level expert. There were 6 attributes and techniques, and the cultivation of a divine level expert was to keep on strengthening their martial will and the prowess of their technique. As for the physical body, it would be great if it could be strong. However, if it was not strong enough, it would not affect one's advancement. After all, it was true that the attributes of the physical body were helpful to one's battle prowess. However, at this level, it was much harder to increase each point than to increase one's martial will. However, Fang Xinjian's job as the Eternal Sword Seigneur had greatly strengthened his physical body. The 100 points increment to all his attributes could be said to be heaven-defying, and the full explosive power of his physical body and martial will had greatly increased his battle prowess. It was only after cultivating until the next morning that Fang Xinjian regained his senses. His mind was still filled with the various sword techniques and cultivation paths for the various levels of the divine level. His eyes flashed with an inexplicable glow, and he once again looked in the direction of the Xingwu region. It's this feeling again. It seems that the first prince hasn't given up yet. The corners of Fang Xinjian's lips curled up. With a single thought, the 4 white bone short swords flew to his side. Following that, his body flickered, and he appeared 10,000 meters up in the sky. Taking a step forward, a powerful rebound force seethed out from void space. Simultaneously, Fang Xinjian's deathly sword intent encompassed his body. He tore through the sky, releasing a series of explosive sounds as he flew toward the Xingwu region. Simultaneously, on the Mingyue Mountain where the full moon shrine was located in the Xingwu region, there were many lanterns and colored banners everywhere. There were also busy crowds and countless teams and carriages. The entire Mingyue Mountain was filled with a joyous atmosphere. Although there were still a few more days before the wedding, the people who were sending gifts had already lined up for over 10 leagues. From the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain, a crimson carpet was laid out along with tables and chairs for the banquet. The first prince's marriage to the granddaughter of one of the 10 great divine-level experts, the blue sacred moonlight. This matter was too great, and countless influences had rushed over long ago, ready to take sides. Chapter 6:16. An old man looked at the endless fleet of carriages at the foot of the mountain and exclaimed, "Tsk, tsk, the full moon shrine and the first prince. This wedding is really extravagant." He pointed to the black dots in the sky and said, "Look, those are the first prince's 12 purple thunder fire beasts. Tsk, tsk, all of them are level 29 ferocious beasts. It's said that they'll be pulling the carriages on the day of the wedding and picking up the bride. When the time comes, there'll even be the full moon shrine's mystic darkness puppets as guards. Even the princess won't have such a grand occasion." The few young men behind him kept on nodding, their faces filled with astonishment and yearning. One of them asked, "Master, this full moon shrine is so rich. During the few days we've been staying here, we've been eating ferocious beasts and all sorts of medicinal cuisine. It's much better than the food in our battle hall." The old man from the battle hall said unhappily, "Isn't that obvious? The full moon shrine has been in business for several centuries and has always been a top-notch influence in the Xingwu region. This generation even has the support of a divine-level expert like the blue sacred moonlight. How much wealth have they plundered? They won't be able to finish spending it even if they were to spend several hundred lifetimes. As they spoke, thunderous sounds rang out in the sky. A dark golden chariot cut across the sky, and 6 crimson-red dragons that seemed to be covered in layers of lava dragged the dark golden chariot. They flew across the sky and descended toward the peak of the Mingyue mountain. The old man from the battle hall gasped and said, Could this be the path of hell's indestructible chariot? Those 6 dragons are lava colossal dragons? There are no longer any dragons left in Miracle World. Previously, it was said that the path of hell still had some dragons left, but I always thought that it was fake. Now, it seems that it's true. To think that the Abyss Lord, ancient path of hell's sect master, has even given the indestructible chariot and lava colossal dragons to the first prince. It seems that the first prince is really going to inherit the empire. The disciples behind him, or rather, everyone on the Mingyue mountain, looked at the chariot and the colossal dragons in the sky in astonishment. They looked at the majestic powers and astonishing auras, and countless animals were trembling from the pressure coming from the 6 colossal dragons. It was only when the battlefield landed on the peak of the mountain that the feeling gradually subsided. One of the disciples sighed and said, "This is what a man should do. If I could have 10% of the first prince's achievements in this lifetime, I'd be satisfied. In this generation, the first prince is still at his peak and can be said to be the strongest." Another disciple said, "Fang Xinjian is also very amazing. He killed the undying Xia and disbanded the 8-directional Crimson Dragon with a single word. His prowess is unparalleled, and I don't think he's any weaker than the first prince." The old man from the battle hall shook his head. "Fang Xinjian is still a little weaker than the first prince." Looking at his disciples' gazes, the old man mumbled, "Fang Xinjian's foundation is too weak. It's already a great fortune for him to be able to defeat Xia and attain the divine level. However, he doesn't have a divine level expert backing him up, nor does he have a divine level legacy. How can he be compared to the first prince?" Behind the first prince was the king, the Abyss Lord, the ancient path of hell, and the entire empire. The first prince had endless resources and overwhelming influence. The martial arts he had passed down also had countless divine-level cultivation method. This kind of accumulation and foundation was the most terrifying. Don't think that Fang Xinjian is jumping around so much now. In at most 1 to 2 years, he'll be surpassed by the first prince. 3 to 4 years later, he won't be a match for the first prince at all. A small sect will send out a genius who will be in the lead from the start and then be surpassed by a disciple from a major sect. I've seen far too many cases where one's accumulation is the key to success. Putting aside the discussions going on among the people on Mingyue Mountain after the indestructible chariot landed, the first prince walked down step by step with a stern disposition. The servants in the surroundings did not even dare to breathe too loudly. The first prince followed the attendant to a secret room, pushed open the door, and saw over 10 knights with varying appearances. Some were valiant, some were solemn, and some were ordinary knights. Seated at the very top was a bald old man with a long beard and a graceful and luxuriously dressed married lady with fair skin and pitch-black long hair. The bald old man with a long scar on his head and a beard that dragged all the way to the ground was naturally the Tianmen clan's previous clan head, the Enraged Lion. As for the married lady with fair skin and pitch-black long hair, who looked like she was only middle-aged, she was actually the divine-level expert who was over 100 years old, the Blue Sacred Moonlight. Divine-level experts had long been able to freely control their physical bodies and change their appearances. The reason why the two of them were able to maintain their original appearances was merely out of habit. Seeing the first prince's appearance, the Enraged Lion lifted his head and said, "To think that the Abyss Lord has even given you the indestructible chariot. It seems that in your generation, the Krieg royal family is going to let you be both the sect master and the emperor." The first prince did not reply to this question and merely said, Fang Xinjian's abilities are extraordinary. I wonder how the preparations are going? Hearing the first prince's words, a hint of impatience flashed on the blue sacred moonlight's face. He's just a country bumpkin. Are the three of us unable to deal with him after joining forces? Isn't it just killing Xia? Although that poor lad has attained the second tier of the divine level, the method he used to condense his martial will was self-created and is very weak. How can it be compared to our legacies? It's not a big deal for Fang Xinjian to be able to kill Xia. As a veteran divine-level expert in the Empire, the blue sacred moonlight had dominated the world and killed countless experts and geniuses. The things she valued the most were one's background, bloodline, and legacies. No matter how powerful Fang Xinjian was, in her eyes, he was just a country bumpkin who had stood out for a while. However, he would not be able to amount to much. However, the enraged lion said, after all, he's able to kill a second-tier divine-level expert. It's better for us to be careful. If he were to hide and raise his strength, or if he were to look for our clans or factions to seek revenge, we'll be in big trouble. The blue sacred moonlight nodded calmly. If it wasn't because I'm worried that this brat will deal with my disciple, I wouldn't even bother joining forces with you guys. The first prince frowned and eventually could not help but say, Senior, that Fang Xinjian is not only extremely talented, but his sword arts have also reached the pinnacle of perfection. The three of us probably won't be a match for him if we fight him one-on-one. That's why we have to join forces. Moreover, since we're going to take action, we must ensure that he dies. It's better to go all out and take him seriously. Fang Xinjian isn't that simple. The blue sacred moonlight grinned coldly, wearing an air of superiority. George, to think that you're still in the domineering state. You haven't even inherited 30% of your father's domineeringness. As she spoke, she suddenly shattered and appeared behind George when she next appeared. The enraged lion's eyelids twitched fiercely. Second tier of the divine level? So what if he's at the second tier of the divine level? The blue sacred moonlight said calmly, We old fellows have been at the divine level for too long. Although the world's metamorphosis didn't occur previously and we've been unable to level up, do you really think that we didn't do anything? Our accumulation isn't something that you can imagine. George, your father and the Abyss Lord have amassed wealth from all over the world, gathered the resources of the entire empire, read through the secret manuals of countless factions, and have countless geniuses helping them research martial arts. They also have Saint Adam's legacy, and can be said to be descendants of royalty. If it wasn't because of this, do you think that I would have married Lan Yu to you? Now that the world's metamorphosis has arrived and the nine-tiered heavens has been formed, your father and uncle have improved by leaps and bounds after so many years of accumulation. They might have already started striving for Tier 3 or even Tier 4 of the divine level. As for the Holy Sea of Truth, the few Guardian Kings are definitely at Tier 2. Those few saints have accumulated their strength for several decades and are truly unfathomable. It's possible that they're even at Tier 5 of the divine level. Chapter 6:17. If not for the disappearance of the previous Guardian King, the Mage Association, and the few saints of the Holy Sea of Truth being busy with internal strife, how could we possibly have a chance? Saying this, the blue sacred moonlight's mocking smile became even more pronounced. But what does this count for? The experts from ancient times would usually cultivate hard day and night, tempering their martial wills. When the world's metamorphosis came, there were quite a number of them who attained Tier 6 or even 7 of the divine level in one go. However, even for such experts, the number of them who survived the world's great calamity and the repeated impacts could be counted on one's fingers. Only people like you, who have just attained the divine level and have insufficient accumulations, find it difficult to strive for a breakthrough. Think of Xia as a powerful character. To be the first to attain Tier 2 of the divine level? You're all frogs at the bottom of a well. It's just that we're unwilling to reveal our abilities. Hearing the blue sacred moonlight's words, the enraged lion frowned, feeling that he had really been a frog in a well. The first prince's pupils contracted slightly, as if he had not expected that the blue sacred moonlight had also reached Tier 2 of the divine level. However, as if feeling that her current abilities were not shocking enough, the blue sacred moonlight shouted to a lady at the side, "Lan Yu, let the two sirs witness your abilities." The lady who was called Lan Yu wore a blue silk dress and had a slender figure. Her black hair draped over her shoulders, and she had a pair of enchanting big eyes. She was definitely a rare beauty. Under the silk dress, her smooth and fair thighs were occasionally revealed, and they were enough to make any man's blood boil. This was especially so for her face and figure. Every part of her exuded a sense of perfection. It was as if any more would be considered too little, and any less would be considered too much. Hearing the blue sacred moonlight's words, she revealed a hint of a smile and said, "All right, grandmother. Everyone, please excuse me." With that, a layer of blurry moonlight appeared on her body. The moonlight passed through the air, releasing kacha-kacha sounds and freezing the air. A hint of surprise flashed on the enraged lion's face. "You've also attained the divine level?" The many elders of the Tianmen clan behind him, as well as the Tianmen clan's head, all revealed expressions of great wariness. This time around, when the enraged lion attained the divine level, these elders were all experts above level 29. There were even a few demigods, and the Tianmen clan's head was a demigod with 4 tiers of perfection. On the other hand, there were only 2 ladies on the blue sacred moonlight's side. This gave them a sense of superiority as they had the advantage in numbers. However, this sense of superiority completely disappeared after the blue sacred moonlight and Lan Yu revealed their abilities as Tier 2 and 1 divine level experts respectively. The enraged lion opened his mouth and finally said, as expected of the full moon shrine, "You have a deep legacy and many geniuses." Although the 7 great clans had been founded by the divine-level experts who had founded the country, they only had a history of 200 years. However, the history of the full moon shrine could be traced back to 1,000 years ago. Over the past 1,000 years, there had been countless geniuses and experts. As the generations of development went on, their martial arts cultivation also got increasingly powerful. The first prince looked deeply at Lan Yu, as if he had not expected his fiancée to be so powerful. However, the blue sacred moonlight said calmly, "All right, George. After you and Lan Yu get married, you'll be a family. You should spend the next 2 days getting to know each other better." She then instructed Lan Yu, "Bring George around to familiarize himself with the Mingyue Mountain and bring him around to have some fun. The 2 of you should also get to know each other better." As the blue sacred moonlight spoke, her tone was filled with a commanding tone. She had the style of a great clan's head, yet she was even more impressive than the enraged lion. Clearly, she was the kind of head who had to take care of even the matters of their children, grandchildren, dating, marriage, and job transitions. Hearing her commanding tone, a hint of displeasure flashed in the first prince's eyes. However, at the thought of how he had to join forces to deal with Fang Xinjian after suffering heavy injuries in the Hades vault, he held it in. However, Lan Yu nodded and said, "All right, grandmother. I'll bring George around to have some fun." The first prince reminded, Fang Xinjian might come at any moment. "It's better for us to make some preparations in advance. I've gotten someone to bring over materials for a formation. We can set up a formation on Mingyue Mountain to increase our battle prowess." "Formation? What kind of joke is that?" The blue sacred moonlight frowned, and the entire space instantly became extremely gloomy. Every single blade of grass and tree on Mingyue Mountain has been passed down from generation to generation. This is the culture of the full moon shrine. How can the shrine's history and foundation be changed so easily? Or are we going to change it for the sake of a country bumpkin? What kind of joke is that? The blue sacred moonlight waved her hand, not agreeing to the first prince's request. She said resolutely, "This is impossible. George, you should just stay on Mingyue Mountain for the next few days and familiarize yourself with Lan Yu. As for that little bumpkin Fang Xinjian, he's just a lowly person who doesn't have any legacies. Now that he's here, there's no need for him to go back. With me around and the three of you around, if even this can make him go back, then all our years of cultivation have gone to waste. We might as well stop cultivating and just go home to sell sweet potatoes." When the enraged lion saw the blue sacred moonlight's display of power, he no longer believed that Fang Xinjian would be able to survive. Instead, he said worriedly, "First Prince, are you sure that little B** starred will come? I think we might as well head to the Great Western region to look for him." The first prince said, "He'll probably come." Thinking of how confident Fang Xinjian was after attaining the divine level and how arrogant he was when he fought against him, the first prince smiled coldly and said, "After attaining the divine level, this little thief thinks that he's invincible. Now that I'm getting married, he'll definitely come." "That'll do," the blue sacred moonlight said calmly. The blue sacred moonlight said indifferently, "When he comes, just take care of him. Today we can be considered to have met, so let's disperse." Just as everyone was speaking, the four divine level experts looked toward the sky at the same time. At the next moment, strong gales descended from the sky, and black deathly sword intents came smashing down like a myriad of thunderbolts, tearing off the roofs above everyone's heads. Fang Xinjian stood in void space and slowly floated down toward the ground. "As expected, they're here. And there are quite a lot of people?" Fang Xinjian threw a glance at the first prince and the others before standing firmly on the ground. 4 white-boned short swords swam around him like many swimming fish. "First prince, on account of the second prince, I won't kill you today. I'll only cripple you. As for the other unrelated people, if you don't wish to die, then scram." Hearing Fang Xinjian's words, everyone present was so infuriated that they started laughing. Which one of them was not a renowned character within the empire? All of them were experts amongst experts, especially the 4 divine level expert. This was especially so for the 4 divine level expert. All of them had extremely strong martial wills and were extremely confident in their battle prowess. Right now, seeing that Fang Xinjian had barged into the place where the 4 of them were supposed to meet, the enraged lion could not help but laugh. "Fang Xinjian, your luck is really bad. You didn't come earlier or later, but you just had to come at this critical juncture to send yourself to death." "Oh!" Fang Xinjian threw an indifferent glance toward the enraged lion, and his eyes emitted a strange glow. "Tier 1 of the divine level? You want to kill me as well? Trash!" After saying that, he tapped out with a finger, and the 4 white-boned short swords instantly unleashed a power that astonished everyone present. They shot out toward the enraged lion. Chapter 6:18 Trash. As Fang Xinjian made his move, the tremendous amount of ether particles started seething. Within a range of 100,000 meters, endless energy tides gushed out toward the 4 white-boned short swords. Violent powers seethed incessantly around Fang Xinjian, and at this moment, the space seemed to have become distorted to an extreme. Just as everyone sensed this terrifying power, 4 streams of sword light swept out toward the enraged lion. The 4 white-boned short swords intersected and flashed. Endless killing auras descended from the sky, as if wanting to freeze the entire space. Millions and millions of infiltrating void sword chis swept out through void space together with the attacks of the 4 white-boned short sword. They struck the enraged lion's body and instantly turned his body into a splatter of blood. Then even the blood evaporated completely, leaving not a single bit of his physical body behind. The enraged lion's physical body was instantly killed, and his martial will was also slashed into pieces, turning into remnant light spheres that floated in midair. "Ah!" In void space, the enraged lion's martial will swept out, letting out a series of agonizing cries and furious bellows. Many white light spheres shattered in midair, and the enraged lion's hideous and distorted face kept on appearing within them. Although these light spheres had suffered from serious injuries, they still wanted to gather together and form the enraged lion's martial will once again. Everything had happened in less than 0.0001 second. The enraged lion's martial will should have been destroyed, and he would have died completely after the 4 white bone short swords continued to attack. However, at this moment, this Tianmen clan's pillar of support had completely unleashed all of his powers. Lumps of white light shone brightly, and all of his martial will turned into countless small people wearing golden armor with light wings on their backs at lightning speed. A series of hymns and holy words appeared in the air as the light figures appeared. It was as if the divine country from the heavens had descended into the mortal world, wanting to wipe out all evil. This was the Tianmen clan's method of condensing their martial will. The central heaven physique allowed them to condense their martial will into a divine country, a true army. The enraged lion had not expected that Fang Xinjian would be so ferocious. Fang Xinjian had killed his physical body with a single sword attack at the slightest disagreement. The enraged lion knew that even if he were to unleash his full power, it would be impossible for him to fend off Fang Xinjian's attack. Fortunately, he was not alone here. He believed that as long as he could hold on for 1,000th of a second, or even a 10,000th of a second, the others would help him share the burden. The moment these small divine generals and divine soldiers appeared, their figures flashed as they waved their flags and shouted. It was as if they were in a war, charging out toward the surrounding infiltrating void sword cheese. Bang 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 bang! Explosive sounds rang out incessantly as these divine generals clashed against the infiltrating void sword cheese. Each of the divine generals performed various martial arts, including sword arts, saber arts, spear arts, crossbow arts, fist arts, and so on. The lines of their bodies were distinct, and the circulation of their powers was exquisite. It was as if they were countless true experts. Every set of martial arts displayed by these divine generals could probably create a new sect. In that instant, a small portion of the infiltrating void sword cheese that filled up the sky was destroyed. However, very soon, even more infiltrating void sword cheese came gushing down. The divine general that the enraged lion had turned into was reduced rapidly, and the entire central divine country was on the verge of collapse. It was as if it had been invaded by demons and was welcoming the end of the world. However, the enraged lion was not the only one present. Just as the enraged lion was holding on for a moment, there was finally someone present who could intervene in Fang Xinjian's attack. The first person to make a move was naturally the strongest expert in the First Prince's faction, the Full Moon Shrine's dominator, and the blue sacred moonlight who had dominated the world for several decades. She suddenly exploded, and there seemed to be mercury-like moonlight scattering down in the air, condensing on Fang Xinjian's back. She once again took on the appearance of the blue sacred moonlight, and a fair and tender small hand pressed out toward Fang Xinjian's back. This palm attack was extremely fast, and when it was formed, it was less than an inch away from Fang Xinjian. In that instant, it had already pressed down on Fang Xinjian's back. There was no way for Fang Xinjian to dodge or evade. Especially in this palm attack, there was a gush of eternity, loneliness, apprehension, and the feeling of being lonely at the top gushing out. This was a concept that the Full Moon Shrine's experts had created based on the characteristics of the moon over the generations. Although there was no longer a moon in Miracle World, the martial arts comprehended from observing the moon had been passed down, just like the myriad stars' palace. This palm attack from the blue sacred moonlight contained the eternity of the moon, the cold arrogance of the moon, and the lonely thoughts of the moon. It was the Full Moon Shrine's signature martial art, the Full Moon Palm. As a life progressed from being weak to becoming strong, its requirements toward the outside world and society would naturally become increasingly lower. When it became strong to a certain extent, it would be like the moon high up in the sky. It would be self-sufficient and would not require anything from others of its kind. Only those who were able to endure the coldness and loneliness of cutting off all emotions would become the strongest life form. This was the full moon shrine's understanding of the moon, its power, and its cultivation. The full moon palm, which was created with this concept, contained a concept of eternity, loneliness, and the feeling of being lonely at the top. With a single palm attack, the full moon palm could even make one feel as if their thoughts had become that of the moon high up in the sky. They would only be able to sense endless loneliness, and life would seem to have become meaningless. With a single palm attack, the opponent's battle will, and even their will to survive, would be destroyed. However, what kind of person was Fang Xijian? He was someone who could seek survival in the face of death, someone who had taken the initiative to enter into a state of feigned death for the sake of improving his sword art. He was someone who had a martial will of 800 points, and he also had the assistance of the Heaven's Volition sword intent, which was also a divine-level expert's will. When the blue sacred moonlight's palm landed on Fang Xijian's body, the latter's body trembled slightly, but he did not move at all. How is this possible? My martial will is at 700 points. With a single full moon palm, even if a mountain top were to collapse, he would still be fine? At the same time that the blue sacred moonlight attacked Fang Xijian, the first prince and Lan Yu also made their move. They were unable to move at akin to light speed, and could only attack across space. 2 gushes of martial will gushed out toward the white bone short sword, attempting to stop the celestial eradication sword formation from killing the enraged lion. The first prince performed an overturned hell, while Lan Yu performed a full moon palm. They turned into 2 gushes of martial will, one black and one white, from the left and right respectively, and grabbed out toward the white bone short sword. In an instant, the 4 divine-level experts unleashed their powers concurrently, working together to stop Fang Xijian's massacre. Faced with all of this, Fang Xijian's eyes were filled with indifference. There were only waves of black deathly sword intents flowing out. All of you want to stop me? Then I'll kill one first before we talk. The black deathly sword intents collided into the blue sacred moonlight's palm. The latter let out a stifled snort and was sent flying, smashing through the walls of houses and crushing the mountain under her feet. A long bloody gash appeared on her palm, and her eyes were filled with astonishment. Concurrently, the 4 swords of the celestial eradication sword formation split up. One of the white bone short swords slashed out toward the first prince's overturned hell, while the other slashed out toward Lan Yu's full moon palm. A myriad of black cheese gushed out, and the all-conquering sword was activated at full power, slashing the powers unleashed by the 2 of them into a myriad of light spots. With a single move, the 2 huge black and white hands seemed to have been annihilated, dissipating into the air. The 2 of them took a step back, feeling an endless killing aura gushing toward them. The exploding sword cheese seemed to want to slash their bodies into pieces, and they could only focus on defending against the repercussions of the sword cheese. Simultaneously, the 2 remaining white bone short swords brought about layers and layers of stacking sword cheese, completely drowning the enraged lion. Chapter 619. Impossible. I'm a divine-level expert from the Tianmen clan. I've attained the divine level and am about to make a name for myself. How can I possibly die? How can I possibly die here? Endless regret, fear, and despair filled up the enraged lion's heart. He fought back with all his might, unleashing a myriad of martial wills glow to fend off the sword cheese. However, he was unable to fend off the endless sword cheese that came charging toward him. He could only watch as his martial will was incessantly slashed and crushed. In the end, it turned into large areas of white light and completely dissipated into the air. After killing the enraged lion in an instant, Fang Xijian looked toward the remaining 3 people. Deathly sword intents surrounded the entire place, causing everyone to shiver. Whoever I want to kill, that person will have to die. No one in the world can stop me. This was the domineering aura that Feng Xinjian was displaying. Whoever he wanted to die, that person would have to die. Feng Xinjian looked at the blue sacred moonlight and said calmly, I'm going to cripple the first prince. Are you going to stop me? The Tianmen clan's head and the others looked at this scene in great astonishment. It was as if they found it hard to believe that their divine-level expert had been killed so easily by Feng Xinjian. It was as easy as killing a chicken or a pig. Hearing Feng Xinjian's words, a hint of fury flashed in the blue sacred moonlight's eyes. Ever since she had attained the divine level, when had anyone dared to speak to her like this? Good. Brat, you're really as arrogant as George said. Right now, the blue sacred moonlight was no longer looking down on Feng Xinjian. Instead, it was replaced with an extremely solemn and serious expression. To be able to kill one person under the joint efforts of 4 divine-level experts. She had no choice but to take such abilities seriously. As she spoke, the entire Mingyue mountain started trembling, and waves of distortions appeared on the blue sacred moonlight's body. It was as if countless powers were condensing, distorting the space. The first prince's countenance changed, and he said, This is the power of the formation? The blue sacred moonlight said proudly, That's right. Every single blade of grass and every tree on the Mingyue mountain is very particular. That's why I didn't allow you to touch them. Today, I'll let you see the true power of my full moon shrine. I'll let you know why I have the confidence to join forces with your royal family. After being reinforced by the full moon shrine for generations, the entire Mingyue mountain has become a superweapon. It will constantly absorb the consciousness fragments and memory fragments of the residents on it. After hundreds of years of blessing, how strong was its power? Even I don't know. In that instant, the blue sacred moonlight was wrapped up by layers and layers of stacking spatial distortions. Under the pressure of the powers, lightning and fire kept on shooting out in the surroundings, and the ground was also being pressed open. Rocks and sand kept on being pushed up into the sky, floating up. The first prince looked at this scene in great astonishment. The pressure that the blue sacred moonlight was exuding right now was so powerful that he had never felt it before. As she spoke, the blue sacred moonlight was already walking toward Feng Xinjian. With each step she took, the ground under her feet would shatter incessantly, turning into countless gravel that floated up into the sky. However, as she got closer to Feng Xinjian, the impact of each step she took became increasingly weaker. In the end, although there were layers of distortions wrapping around her, they no longer caused the ground to crack and the sand to float up. This did not mean that she had become weaker. Instead, it meant that all of her powers were circling around a fixed location with the help of the spatial distortions. All of her powers were gathered together, so she would not cause any damage to the surrounding environment. Of course, it was impossible for there to be no leakage at all. It was just that there would only be some leakage that would cause damage to the surroundings. For conferred knights, the stronger they were, the greater the damage they would cause to the surrounding environment. For divine-level experts, the stronger they were, the more they would not be affected by worldly affairs. The spatial distortions would be more intense, and their powers would be more condensed. Such a state was clearly even more terrifying than earlier. At the sight of this scene, the Tianmen clan's head opened his mouth wide. Father spent a total of 3 months but was still unable to reach the stage of distorting space and gathering his powers. To be able to use spatial distortions to concentrate one's powers at a single point without too much leakage, one would need to be at least at the pinnacle of Tier 1 of the divine level. Right now, the blue sacred moonlight has gathered powers that far exceed her level. To think that she is still able to maintain such a level of control. Amazing, really amazing. Is this the blue sacred moonlight's power? The blue sacred moonlight stood 10 meters away from Feng Xinjian and stopped in her tracks. She looked at Feng Xinjian with an air of superiority. Fang Xinjian, I see that you're still a promising talent. If you're willing to lower your head, admit your mistakes, and come under my wing, it's not that I can't consider letting you off today. Come under your wing? Fang Xinjian said calmly, Old man, why is a weakling like you being so arrogant? Before Fang Xinjian could finish his words, the blue sacred moonlight had already taken a step forward and suddenly appeared before him. Having received the reinforcements from several hundred years of Minghui Mountain's powers, the blue sacred moonlight had obtained powers that far surpassed those at Tier 2 of the divine level and was now extremely close to those at Tier 3 of the divine level. She punched Fang Xinjian's stomach, and amidst a series of air currents with a bang, Fang Xinjian took a step back. However, before he could take that step back, the blue sacred moonlight kicked Fang Xinjian's waist again. Amidst explosive banging sounds, Fang Xinjian's body trembled once again, and he was about to fly out in another direction. The rocks that were several hundred meters away from Fang Xinjian were shattered by the wind created by the kick. After a punch and a kick, Fang Xinjian's body was about to fly out when the blue sacred moonlight punched Fang Xinjian's face again. Fang Xinjian's head tilted back slightly, and then a hand chop landed on Fang Xinjian's throat. Violent air currents blew past Fang Xinjian's body, shattering the ground that was over 100 meters behind him. The blue sacred moonlight's punches and kicks did not seem to have a lot of power. This was because divine-level experts could make use of spatial distortions to condense their powers, and there would not be too much leakage. It might seem as if the wind created by the kick had shattered the rocks and the wind created by the palm tore through the ground, but the actual power contained within them could destroy the entire Minghui Mountain and sink the entire mountain range into the ground. To outsiders, it might seem as if Fang Xinjian was unable to retaliate. However, almost 99% of the explosive powers had struck Fang Xinjian's body, yet they had not been able to harm Fang Xinjian in the slightest. When the blue sacred moonlight sensed this scene, she revealed an astonished expression. In the distance, the 4 white bone short swords floated quietly, exuding streams of sword cheese. Meanwhile, faint sword shadows kept on appearing all over Fang Xinjian's body. The celestial eradication sword formation could be used for offense, but it could also be used for defense. Right now, when Fang Xinjian activated the sword formation, all the sword cheese powers were encompassed on the surface of his body. How terrifying was the protection from trillions of sword cheese! This allowed his defense to be able to take on the blue sacred moonlight's attacks head-on and even come out unscathed. However, in such a situation, the 4 white bone short swords were very weak. Once the 4 short swords were broken, they would be able to break through the sword formation. This was the weakness of the sword formation's possession. It was a pity that the blue sacred moonlight had yet to figure out the profoundness behind this. She was already stunned by the scene before her. However, she regained her senses very quickly, and a hint of viciousness flashed in her eyes. She seemed to have turned into a light net, shattering and flashing incessantly, surrounding Fang Xinjian's body and striking out a myriad of fist shadows. Bang 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 bang! Explosive sounds rang out continuously, as if several thousand great hammers were smashing onto metal. The ground under Fang Xinjian's feet shattered instantly, and a power that could blast the entire demonic city 100 times over exploded to and fro on the surface of his body. However, he was still unable to break through the sword formation's defense. Chapter 620. The spatial distortions continued to expand, and in the blink of an eye, they had already spread out to a range of 10 meters from the two of them. Everything became grotesque and dazzling, and one could only vaguely see the blue sacred moonlight's fists lashing out at the air incessantly, as if wanting to shatter the space before her. The blue sacred moonlight's figure completely encompassed Fang Xinjian. The first prince looked at this scene. Although the prowess of each of her punches and kicks seemed to be no different from that of ordinary conferred knights, He could sense the terrifying power contained in each of the blue sacred moonlight's attacks from the intense spatial distortions which had expanded to a radius of 10 meters. How terrifying was the power to be able to extend the spatial distortions to a range of 10 meters. Even when the first prince went all out, he could only cause the spatial distortions to appear in the air like water ripples. With such power, a casual punch or kick from the blue sacred moonlight would probably be able to tear the first prince into dust. The first prince said solemnly, "Senior blue sacred moonlight, how long can she last in this state?" In theory, it should be limitless. As long as Mingyue Mountain's power isn't depleted, she'll be able to continue on, Lan Yu said with a hint of confidence. At the very least, during this period of time, it's hard to defeat Grandma. Even if the Abyss Lord and His Majesty were to come, they probably won't be able to defeat Grandma in this state. The Tianmen clan's head looked at the blue sacred moonlight, who kept on lashing out at Fang Xinjian, and thought to himself, is this the accumulation of a divine-level expert? As expected, none of the old fellows who attained the divine level before the world's metamorphosis are simple. How much power does one need to have in order to create spatial distortions of such a degree? If she were to punch out at full power, the entire Mingyue Mountain would probably be destroyed. It's a pity that father was beaten to death by Fang Xinjian. If only he could survive. Thinking of this, the first prince looked at Fang Xinjian, who was being lashed out incessantly, and the glee in his eyes grew. Both his son and father had died in Fang Xinjian's hands. How could he not feel hatred and detest him? He had the urge to strangle Fang Xinjian with his own hand. It's a pity, what a pity. I might not be able to exact revenge even if I were to spend my entire life. However, your arrogance and conceit have caused your death. Feel our anger and hatred and then die. Amidst everyone's astonished, vengeful, and delighted gazes, the blue sacred moonlight suddenly came to a stop. A myriad of fist shadows dissipated, and she stood before Fang Xinjian. Her fist was grabbed by Fang Xinjian's palm, and her face was filled with astonishment. Fang Xinjian's fist also had layers of spatial distortions. That was the power of the celestial slaying sword formation exploding. Have you had enough fun? Fang Xinjian said calmly, then go and die. As he spoke, Fang Xinjian smashed his fist fiercely onto the blue sacred moonlight's stomach. The violent power passed through the distorted space, and the all-conquering sword force smashed through the blue sacred moonlight's stomach without stopping at all. The blue sacred moonlight's eyes were filled with killing intent. Not caring about the injuries on her body at all, she continued to exchange punches with Fang Xinjian. She lashed out a punch onto Fang Xinjian's forehead, but Fang Xinjian's head merely tilted up slightly. At the same time, he stomped down on the blue sacred moonlight's left leg, breaking it. The blue sacred moonlight tapped out a finger onto Fang Xinjian's chest again. Fang Xinjian's chest sank a little, and he also tapped out a finger onto the blue sacred moonlight's chest, causing it to explode. The blue sacred moonlight's face was filled with craziness, and her entire body was covered in blood. She ignored the injuries on her body, and once again lashed out her palm onto Fang Xinjian's chest. Fang Xinjian's body trembled slightly, and then he punched through the blue sacred moonlight's shoulder, sending her broken limb flying out with a smack. Ah! An ear-piercing scream rang out from the blue sacred moonlight's martial will. Her entire body shattered once again, but with a flash she appeared unscathed. She looked at Fang Xinjian, who was still unscathed, in astonishment. Impossible! You've received so many attacks from me, so how can you still be unscathed? How can your physical body be so powerful? How can your attacks penetrate through my defense? Simultaneously, she discovered that she had not managed to escape and was still appearing before Fang Xinjian. What have you done? What power is this? She felt that her entire body was encompassed by streams of auras that were like sharp swords, and she was unable to move at light speed. During the close combat earlier, Fang Xinjian had already made good use of the time to lock onto the other party with the celestial eradication, sword formation, and wrap her up with sword cheese. This way, he would not have to worry that she would be able to escape. Otherwise, even Fang Xinjian would have a headache if he were to fight against a second-tier divine-level expert who could move at close to light speed. Why are there so many questions? Fang Xinjian grabbed the blue sacred moonlight's head and lifted her up like a little chick. I'm stronger than you. It's that simple. As he spoke, Fang Xinjian had already punched through the blue sacred moonlight's head. Violent sword cheese continued to transmit down, crushing the blue sacred moonlight's entire body into dust. Streams of martial will that were like moonlight appeared. The moment they appeared, they were once again smashed by Fang Xinjian's punch, turning into countless starlight that scattered out. However, it was true that the blue sacred moonlight was much stronger than the enraged lion. After being smashed by Fang Xinjian with a few consecutive punches, her martial will continued to tremble, wanting to gather together once again. There were even a few parts of her martial will that flashed rapidly, wanting to escape. It was a pity that she was unable to escape under the encompassing of the celestial eradication sword formation. Fang Xinjian clenched one of his hands in the end, and the power of the sword formation contracted abruptly, compressing the blue sacred moonlight's remnant martial will into a ball of light that floated in his hand. The blue sacred moonlight's face was contorted, filled with terror, fury, and despair as she was clenched in Fang Xinjian's hand. Fang Xinjian threw a glance toward everyone and said, "Is there anyone else who wishes to stop me?" Lan Yu looked at this scene with a pale countenance. Her beautiful face had turned pale from fright. Seeing that her grandmother, whom she revered like a god, was being clenched in Fang Xinjian's hand, her entire view of the world was overturned. This was 10 or even 100 times more of the shock and blow that Fang Xinjian had given her when he had defeated her. After being glanced at by Fang Xinjian, how could she still dare to resist? Her body trembled and she bit her lip, not daring to show any dissatisfaction. The Tianmen clan's head lowered his head, his eyes filled with astonishment. He was deeply astonished by Fang Xinjian's power. This kid is too amazing. How can he be so strong? At this moment, I mustn't go against him. I must hold it in. I must borrow the powers of the other 6 great clans and the Krieg royal family. I must join forces with the powers of our 8 great clans to be able to kill him. Such a person must not be allowed to continue growing. Although he had shown his submission, many schemes kept on appearing in his heart. His eyes were still filled with the vengeance of his son and father having been killed. As if sensing something, Fang Xinjian threw him a glance and said, "You're still not convinced? Then you can die." As Fang Xinjian spoke, sword shadows flashed in void space, and the Tianmen clan's head was slashed into pieces amidst agonizing cries. A furious bellow reverberated in his martial will. "Stop it, Fang Xinjian. I surrender. I've already surrendered. Elder, make a move quickly. Save me." However, Fang Xinjian did not stop at all. Under the Tianmen clan's head's remorseful gaze, Fang Xinjian punched across space and completely crushed the Tianmen clan's head's martial will. Throughout the entire process, the over 10 elders behind the Tianmen clan's head were as quiet as cicadas in winter, not daring to move in the slightest. They did not even dare to look at Fang Xinjian. They stood there in a daze like over 10 wooden men. After doing all these, Fang Xinjian finally turned his gaze toward the first prince. His gaze was ice-cold. He suddenly asked, "George Krieg, have you ever regretted making an enemy out of me?" Chapter 6:21. The weather changed, and the mountains and rivers shook. Looking at the strong gales in the sky and sensing the tremors coming from under their feet, everyone from the battle hall exchanged glances. What happened? There seems to be a battle. Did someone attack Mingyue Mountain? The old man from the battle hall frowned and said resolutely, "What kind of joke is this? The first prince and Miss Lon you will be getting married in a few days. Who would come to make trouble at such a time? Stirring up trouble in such a situation was simply not giving face to Bright Moon Mountain or the entire imperial family, ruining the empire's great plans and committing a crime against the world. Who would dare to do such a thing? After hearing their master's words, everyone present also nodded secretly and felt that their master was right. It was true that the first prince, the blue sacred moonlight, the Abyss Lord, and the king were 4 divine-level experts in total. Who would dare to cause trouble at the wedding and offend 4 divine-level experts at once? The pressure from 4 divine-level experts. Just the thought of it made one's scalp go numb. Just when the people from the battle hall were thinking about this, the ground beneath their feet trembled intensely again. Sounds of explosions rang out, accompanied by shouts and roars of anger. This, even the old man from the battle hall frowned and said in disbelief, "There are really people fighting on Mingyue Mountain?" A short moment later, everyone from the battle hall ran toward the mountain peak where the sounds and air explosions were coming from. On the way, they saw countless cultivators and knights rushing toward the mountain peak as well. Most of them were guests who had come to attend the wedding. Right now, all of them were agitated by the sounds of battle and were rushing toward the mountain peak. The disciples of Mingyue Mountain were mixed in with them, but they only made up a small portion of the crowd. They were unable to stop the advancing crowd at all. 1 to 2 minutes later, the people from the battle hall followed the crowd to the battle scene at the top of the mountain. What they saw was the scene of Fang Xinjian subduing the blue sacred moonlight's martial will and crushing the Tianmen clan's head with a single punch. At the start, they didn't manage to react. But as the people in the surroundings introduced each other, the faces of the old man from the battle hall and his disciples were filled with astonishment. "Look! The first prince? Lady Lan Yu is also there. The woman who was beaten to death. It can't be, blue sacred moonlight. The blue sacred moonlight has been beaten to death. How is this possible? Even her martial will has been taken away. Terrifying, too terrifying. To think that he was still able to kill the blue sacred moonlight despite being besieged by 2 divine-level experts. Who on earth is this man?" At this moment, Fang Xinjian finally turned his gaze towards the first prince. His eyes were icy cold. He suddenly asked, "George Krieg, have you ever regretted making an enemy out of me?" "Regret?" The eldest prince looked at this scene with a gloomy expression and said coldly, "Fang Xinjian, you dare to kill me?" As he spoke, the aura of the lava purgatory surged forth, and a series of dragon roars rang out one after another. 6 lava dragons had already soared into the sky, riding on the indestructible war chariots as they pounced over. Intense aura, boiling blood, and every muscle of the giant dragon sputtered out large chunks of lava, dripping onto the ground and forming pools of lava. Layers of white chi encompassed the heads of the giant dragons. They had broken through the sound barrier and were charging over at supersonic speeds of over 10 times that of supersonic speed. Each of the 6 giant dragons weighed over 10,000 tons. With the 6 of them combined, they were equivalent to an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier that was the size of a small island was charging over at supersonic speeds of over 10 times that of supersonic speed. What kind of prowess was that? Even a mountain would be smashed into pieces from the collision. The aura of the 6 lava dragons charging over at the same time was as if several thousand or tens of thousands of trains were charging over at the same time. Seeing the 6 giant dragons descending from the sky, the people who had rushed over all cried out and retreated. The aura was too terrifying. If the 6 giant dragons were to really charge down, the entire Mingyue Mountain's peak would probably be smashed into smithereens. The mountains would collapse and the earth would crack, destroying the world. However, before the 6 giant dragons could charge far, they saw Fang Xinjian's sword fingers sweeping out. The celestial eradication sword formation was activated once again. Sword light flashed in void space, and an intense deathly sword intent swept out. Suppress all of them! Amidst the world-shaking agonizing cries, several tens of streams of sword light tore through the atmosphere, piercing into the heads, backs and tails of the 6 giant dragons. Dragon blood, dragon scales, and dragon whiskers instantly filled up a large part of the sky. Amidst the agonizing cries, Fang Xinjian's palm pressed down explosively across space, and waves of milky white sword cheese turned into a huge palm that descended from the sky. Right now, the celestial eradication sword formation was in Fang Xinjian's hands, and the energies of the physical particles and ether particles within a range of 100,000 meters were being used by Fang Xinjian in an omnipotent manner. All of you, shut up. At the next moment, like a child using his palm to slap loaches, the 6 giant dragons were slapped onto the platform at the top of the mountain. Amidst a world-shaking explosion, a great amount of sand soared into the sky, the mountain peak cracked, and the Mingyue mountain trembled. It was as if a great earthquake had happened within a range of 1,000 lis. When the smoke and dust dissipated, revealing the cracked mountain peak, the 6 giant dragons could be seen sinking into the mountain, covered in blood. It was as if all the bones and internal organs in their bodies had been shattered. Each of the giant dragons had 3 sword lights pierced into their bodies, nailing them to the mountain and rendering them unable to move at all. Everyone looked at this scene in great astonishment. Although it was astonishing that Fang Xinjian had killed the blue sacred moonlight due to the control of a divine-level expert, the visual effect was far from as astonishing as the scene of Fang Xinjian suppressing the 6 lava dragons. Each of the 6 giant dragons was around 100 meters long and weighed over 10,000 tons. They were like buildings with over 30 floors. Right now, all 6 of them had been suppressed together. It was as if Fang Xinjian had slapped down an aircraft carrier that was flying at over 10 times the speed of sound with a single slap. He was simply invincible. Fang Xinjian. That's Fang Xinjian? What terrifying power and sword arts! What on earth is this martial art? The countenance of the battle hall's old man turned pale as he looked at Fang Xinjian, who was in midair. He was still in a state of great astonishment. Such a sword art? Such a martial art? Is it really something that humans can cultivate? 4 white bone short swords floated next to Fang Xinjian, and endless sword cheese turned into a light circle that was as thick as a thumb, circling around Fang Xinjian. He stepped on void space and slowly landed before the first prince. You didn't escape? Thief, now that you've achieved great mastery in your martial arts, I naturally won't be able to escape. I won't do such meaningless things either. The first prince stared at Fang Xinjian and said, But, Fang Xinjian, let me say this one more time. Do you dare to make a move against me in front of so many people? Fang Xinjian looked at him and did not say anything. The entire place seemed to have sunk into silence. This silent atmosphere soon spread out through the entire mountain peak. Countless people gulped, not daring to say anything. They could only watch this scene quietly. The successor of the royal family, the successor of the ancient path of hell, and the first prince who represented the empire's interests. Even if he did not have the strength to truss a chicken, who would dare to make a move against such a person? Not only would he be making an enemy out of the entire empire, but he would also be changing the history of the entire world. The atmosphere was so oppressive that it was as if water was going to drip out. Everyone stared at Fang Xinjian, as if wanting to see if he would dare to make a move. The entire world's history seemed to be going to undergo an overwhelming change because of Fang Xinjian's choice. Chapter 622. The first prince, George Krieg, was the future successor to the empire. Over the past few years, especially during the 3 to 4 months after the world's metamorphosis, the first prince could be said to have been extremely powerful. With a series of alliances and domineering ways, he had taken over almost half of the authority in the various regions of the empire. Behind the first prince were 2 divine-level experts from the Krieg royal family. Even the School of Sword Art's previous Supreme Chief, one of the 10 divine-level experts, the sword slash of the secular world, had joined the royal family. If one were to make a move against the first prince, they might face the revenge of 3 divine-level experts. The power of a country could bring about endless troubles. Everyone looked at this scene in silence, holding their breaths as if they had even forgotten to breathe. They stared at this scene, which could affect the world's history for several decades in the future. Lan Yu's beautiful eyes were wide open as she looked at Fang Xinjian, who had descended from void space. Various schemes kept on flashing through her mind. To make a move against the first prince in front of so many people. This will mean that he has completely fallen out with the Krieg royal family. Moreover, as the successor to the empire, the first prince will definitely have many life-saving divine weapons and secret arts that he has yet to perform. The reason why he chose not to go all out and instead chose to push Fang Xinjian around is so that he can destroy Fang Xinjian's martial heart. Once he cowers here, a long shadow will probably be left behind in Fang Xinjian's heart, making him feel terrible for the rest of his life. It's not impossible for his martial will to not improve for several decades. Thinking of this, Lan Yu let out a deep breath. However, if he were to make a move against the first prince, it would mean that he has fallen out with the royal family. Once the king and the Abyss Lord set their sights on him, even the current Fang Xinjian would definitely die. Thinking of the extremely unfathomable pair of brothers, the Abyss Lord and the king. Their talent was 10 times that of the first princes, the resources they received were 100 times that of the first princes, and the time they had accumulated was also several decades more than the first prince. Just the thought of how terrifying people like them were now caused Lan Yu's hair to stand on end. If I make a move, I'll definitely die. If I don't make a move, my martial will not be smooth, and it'll probably be hard for me to improve. The first prince is really vicious. Lan Yu took a long look at Fang Xinjian and thought, Fang Xinjian, what will you choose? Although the other people present were not clear on the exact power of the divine-level experts, they knew that the Krieg royal family who had ruled the empire for 200 years was not to be trifled with. They were divine-level experts. In Fang Xinjian's palm, the blue sacred moonlight's remnant martial will let out a piercing laugh. Fang Xinjian, what are you going to choose? Do you want me to help you kill George Krieg? If you are willing to let me go, I can help you kill him. You don't have to do it yourself. Fang Xinjian did not say anything. He merely clenched his fist, and it was as if he had instantly squeezed a balloon. An explosive bang rang out from Fang Xinjian's palm, and the blue sacred moonlight let out a series of agonizing cries as it shattered once again. Then, it slowly gathered back together. This time around, the gathering process was several times slower than in the past. She also appeared extremely transparent and frail, as if she would dissipate at any moment. Clearly, the blue sacred moonlight's martial will had become extremely weak. This time, after recovering, she did not dare to speak carelessly. She could only glare fiercely at Fang Xinjian, her eyes filled with hatred and resentment. It was obvious that he hated Fang Xinjian to the extreme. Fang Xinjian looked at the first prince and said calmly, If I want to kill someone, no one in the world can change my mind. But as I said before, I won't kill you for the sake of the second prince. I'll just destroy your physical body, wear down your martial will, and cripple your cultivation. At the next moment, amidst everyone's astonished gazes, Lan Yu's widened beautiful eyes, and the first prince's astonished and furious gaze, Fang Xinjian punched out across space, and sword force gushed out from his physical body. Deathly sword intents cut across void space, and a circle of light formed from sword cheese slashed out toward the first prince. In that instant all sorts of colorful lights lit up. A pitch-black smoke-like light barrier appeared, and the level 29 Hell's black light barrier lasted for 1,000th of a second. Then, a white armor appeared before him, and the level 29 divine light armor was instantly torn apart, only hanging on for an instant. Seething hellish flames shot out explosively, colliding with the sword cheese. The level 29 purgatory hellfire rock instantly dissipated. Streams of 7-colored light burst out, turning into a 7-colored divine shield that fended off the attack. The level 29 rainbow luck divine shield was shattered. Divine weapons shot out one after another, and the divine weapons, which would make one's eyes go red with envy, were shattered one after another by Fang Xinjian. The 27 divine weapons had lasted for less than 100th of a second. Ah! Many agonizing cries and furious bellows rang out as the first prince's physical body was pierced through by the endless sword cheese. Amidst the crazy tremors, it was as if he would disintegrate at any moment. Godly ascension! The deathly sword intense trembled fiercely, and the first prince only felt that his body had become light. His martial will had been shaken up from his physical body. The 6 heaven-soaring swords soared intense? The first prince let out an astonished cry, and then he was engulfed and dismembered by countless deathly sword intents. How dare you! How dare you! The first prince's phantom image once again gathered together from his shattered martial will. His martial will turned into a pitch-black human figure that bellowed out toward void space like a demon. Fang Xinjian, do you know what you're doing? Are you going to make an enemy out of the entire world? Fang Xinjian looked at the first prince coldly and said calmly, George, do you still not understand? As he said that, he struck out another punch, shattering the first prince's martial will. What I'm going to do? The first prince bellowed and gathered together, but he was once again shattered by Fang Xinjian with a single punch. No one can think of stopping me. Pure martial will turned into waves of light waves and scattered out in all directions. However, within the celestial eradication sword formation, they darted left and right, darting about at light speed. Other than colliding into the sword cheese time and time again, causing layers of ripples to erupt, they were unable to do anything else. It wasn't possible when you were stronger than me in the past, and it's even more so now that you're weaker than me. Then endless sword cheese started to compress, just like how they had dealt with the blue sacred moonlight. They continued to compress the first prince's martial will that had scattered out in all directions, turning it into a light sphere the size of a palm. The first prince bellowed crazily in the light sphere. His distorted and enraged expression was like that of a demon among demons, and his fury seemed to have materialized. However, Fang Xinjian paid him no heed and punched out once again, scattering the first prince's martial will. He then gathered them together and punched out again, scattering the first prince's martial will. This went on for 5 to 6 times, but the first prince continued to bellow furiously, bellow and struggle. Although his martial will was becoming increasingly thinner and weaker, he had no intention of begging for mercy. He merely glared at Fang Xinjian with bloodshot eyes, his gaze filled with madness. What kind of person was the first prince? His ambition was to engulf the entire world. He had always wanted to control the world and become the world's top existence. To him, power was something that was even more important than his life. Right now, Fang Xinjian kept on weakening him. It was as if he was peeling off his skin and breaking his bones. It was even more unbearable than killing him. It was only when Fang Xinjian struck his will until it was like a thin layer of fog that the first prince finally stopped. Chapter 6:23. Right now, the first prince's martial will was so weak that it was almost no different from those at the peak of the first transition. He had completely lost the ability to materialize his will, and even his heaven's perception was a little blurry. His cultivation had regressed to an extreme. The first prince gritted his teeth and looked at Fang Xinjian, not saying another word. His entire being was as deep as hell. It was because he knew that no matter what he said, it would be useless at this moment. It was because Fang Xinjian was the same kind of person as him, and it was impossible for him to change just because of other people's words. Fang Xinjian then swung his sword fingers, and a myriad of sword qis gushed out toward the first prince's physical body. They gathered in the first prince's brain, stimulating a few mysterious spots in his brain. With this stimulation, the aura of the first prince's physical body started to decline at a crazy rate. His brain lost control over his physical body, and his vital energy and blood deteriorated rapidly. His energy also flowed out uncontrollably. Then the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces between the many physical particles kept on being slashed off, and the toughness of his physical body declined rapidly. The first prince's physical body continued to deteriorate. In the blink of an eye, he had regressed from the divine level to a demigod, then from a demigod to an ordinary level 29. Then, he continued to deteriorate to the first transition, and finally, from the first transition to an apprentice. The first prince's physical body was suppressed to that of an ordinary person by Fang Xinjian's unparalleled sword art. Then with a wave of Fang Xinjian's palm, the first prince's martial will returned to his physical body. An endless sense of weakness instantly filled up the first prince's consciousness. Right now, the first prince's physical body was about the same as that of an Olympic athlete, and his mental state was at the level of an ordinary soldier in the special forces. He might be able to live in peace and health for the rest of his life, but it was unknown how long it would take for him to cultivate back to Tier 1 of the divine level. Waves of weakness and discomfort gushed up in his heart. After cultivating for several decades, how long had it been since he had felt this feeling of being an ordinary person? However, there were no signs of dejection in the first prince's eyes. He merely looked at Fang Xinjian coldly and did not fly into a rage or go crazy. However, it was precisely this calmness that made others feel that he was even more profound. Right now, the first prince seemed to have become even more unfathomable. "It's over," the first prince said calmly. "Then can I leave now?" Fang Xinjian also seemed to be a little surprised at how calm the first prince was. Even with his willpower, it was impossible for him to be as calm as the first prince after having his cultivation crippled all of a sudden and having to start cultivating again. Huh! Fang Xinjian's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself, could it be that this isn't his real body? Fang Xinjian suddenly had this suspicion. If this was not the first prince's true body, but just a clone's martial will and a disguised physical body, then it was clear that the first prince had been plotting this for a very long time. By sending a clone over to join forces with the Blue Sacred Moonlight and the Tianmen clan, he would then get them to fight against Fang Xinjian. He could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. It would be for the best if Fang Xinjian died. Even if he did not die, he would have gotten rid of one of the major factions and the Tianmen clan, which was one of the 7 great clans, paving the way for the royal family to centralize power. He would also have attracted a great deal of hatred for himself. When the time came for the royal family to deal with Fang Xinjian, they would naturally receive the support of the other factions and great clans. This was like having mountains and rivers in one's heart and great shrewdness in one's mind. It was as if they were using Fang Xinjian as a blade. However, this is nothing. This is just a small scheme. To a world that possesses extraordinary powers, it's still not the key. When Lan Yu saw the first prince's calm expression, she had clearly thought of the possibility of it being a clone. However, if this isn't his clone but his real body, then it would be even more terrifying. Lan Yu looked at the first prince, who was extremely calm, and suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. After cultivating for several decades and attaining the divine level, his powers were then drawn out by his enemy, and he was reduced to a mere mortal. This is like falling from the clouds into a swamp. If ordinary conferred knights were to encounter such a thing, they would lose control of their mental state and might even go crazy. However, this first prince, if this is really his real body, then his mental state is too terrifying. If he were to cultivate with such a mental state, he would be successful in every endeavor. If he were to go back and cultivate with such a mental state, he might be able to achieve even greater things than before. Moreover, he still has his experience and hasn't lost it. The first prince looked at Feng Xinjian with great calmness and continued, "Why? Could it be that you want to kill me? Are you worried about my talent and mental state and want to kill me now?" Feng Xinjian shook his head with an indifferent expression, and his eyes flashed with a hint of chaos. "There's no need for you to agitate me. I've said that I'll let you live, so I'll let you live. If you can't accept this, you can go back and cultivate. If you can cultivate to the point where you can challenge me again, then I'll be looking forward to it. I only hope that you'll be able to take a few more blows from me next time. It won't be like this time, gathering a bunch of useless people and disappointing me." The first prince lowered his eyelids, and his tone became increasingly ethereal. "Don't worry, Feng Xinjian. I won't let you down next time." With that, he turned and left. Just like an ordinary person, he walked out step by step. Wherever he passed by, the crowd would make way for him. Although he had lost all of his powers and had become an ordinary person, the aura he exuded had become increasingly unfathomable. Moreover, the remnant might he exuded was still present, and no one dared to stop him. Lan Yu walked up to Feng Xinjian and asked, "Sir, are you really going to let him go just like that? Aren't you afraid that he'll come back to take revenge after he achieves success in his cultivation?" After going through such a great change, the first princes can be said to have received the best training. I can tell that his mental state is even more unfathomable than before. Moreover, he still has his cultivation experience. He might really be able to cultivate back to the divine level. It's useless. There was a hint of loneliness in Feng Xinjian's tone. Once he's one step behind, he'll always be behind. With the current changes in the world, it'll be too late by the time he reaches the divine level and catches up. With that, he turned to look at this beauty from the Mingyue mountain and said in a playful tone, "Your master has been crippled by me. Don't you hate me?" "I wouldn't dare to." Lan Yu put on the appearance of a petite lady who was on the verge of tears. She said in a soft and pitiful voice, "Sir, your sword arts are world-shaking, and I'm just a weak young lady. What else can I do? I can only resign myself to fate." However, Feng Xinjian looked at the people from the full moon shrine who were walking over slowly and said calmly, "Your fellow disciples don't think the same way." Several hundred people from the full moon shrine slowly surrounded them. Their eyes were filled with hatred, fear, nervousness, and many other emotions. Feng Xinjian was the person who had supported the full moon shrine and crushed the blue sacred moonlight just like that. How could they not feel hatred and not want to seek revenge? However, the abilities that Feng Xinjian had displayed had shocked them. However, at a time like this, as long as someone were to instigate them, they might very well go crazy and risk their lives. It would probably be another bloodbath. Chapter 624. Seeing this scene, Lan Yu bellowed, "What are you guys doing?" A girl said, "Sister Lan Yu, what did you do to Lady Blue's sacred moonlight?" "Shut up," Lan Yu said coldly. Lord Xinjian and grandmother had a fair fight, and the victor was decided. They didn't use any underhanded means. What are you guys trying to do now? Are you guys so sore losers that you gang up on others after losing? Are you trying to throw the face of our full moon shrine? With just a few words, Lan Yu had managed to subdue the people of the full moon shrine, displaying her prestige among the disciples. With just a few words, she had managed to pacify the many disciples. She then looked at the many guests and gave them a slight apology before canceling the wedding and sending off the many onlookers. Throughout the entire process, Lan Yu displayed the responsibility of a successor of a major faction. She was magnanimous, and her Tier 1 divine level powers gave her sufficient confidence. Feng Xinjian watched on. It was only after everyone had left that he said in amusement, "You're not bad. The blue sacred moonlight is inferior to you. Given enough time, you'll be able to surpass her. Sir, you're too kind. Before Fang Xinjian, Lan Yu seemed to have turned into a gentle and weak young lady again. I wonder how you'll be willing to let grandmother off? Our full moon shrine guarantees that we'll no longer be enemies with you from now on and will fully support the second prince in inheriting the throne. This is what I should do. Fang Xinjian nodded and said, Other than these, I also want to read through all the manuals in your full moon shrine. A few days later, the news of Fang Xinjian defeating the blue sacred moonlight and crippling the first prince spread out like a tornado. For a period of time, the entire world was shaken, and everyone was so astonished by this news that they felt giddy. No one had expected that Fang Xinjian would be able to do this, nor had they expected that Fang Xinjian would dare to do this. The entire empire calmed down, like the calm before the storm. Everyone knew that it was impossible for the Krieg royal family to let the matter rest now that their successor had been crippled. If they did not do anything, it would be equivalent to admitting defeat to Fang Xinjian. Their reputation would be completely ruined, and how would they be able to continue ruling over the empire? Countless influences and organizations stopped what they were doing. All of them were waiting for the Krieg royal family to take action. However, Fang Xinjian remained in the full moon shrine as if he had not sensed anything, flipping through the manuals of this faction that had been passed down for countless years. As he flipped through the book before him, Fang Xinjian's eyes flashed with a chaotic and indifferent light from time to time. It was like the changes of the universe and the operation of the world, and it revealed an unparalleled mysteriousness. The Krieg royal family hasn't thought of dealing with me yet? Fang Xinjian thought to himself. It's probably because their attention has been placed on the evil god ritual. Summoning the evil god, killing the evil god, and seizing the power within. Once they succeed, it'll be a major event that can change the history of the world. While he was thinking about these, Fang Xinjian's brain was also revolving at high speed. He studied the full moon shrine's manuals, learned the various martial techniques in them, and filled his mind with his sword art. The full moon shrine's method of condensing one's martial will at the first tier of the divine level was called the Moonlight King physique. It was an existence that condensed one's martial will into the form of moonlight. It might not be very strong, but it had many changes and was extremely agile. Could also freeze all living things in the world. This allowed Fang Xinjian to see another direction in condensing one's martial will, and it provided him with more information to condense his martial will. Fang Xinjian had also read through the cultivation method for the second tier of the divine level, where one's physical body would shatter and one's will would traverse. As for the third tier of the divine level, where one's physical body would be completely converted into ether particles. However, the full moon shrine only had information on cultivating up to the third tier of the divine level. In this aspect, it was indeed much worse than the mystic abyss Heavenly Emperor's legacy. Standing next to Fang Xinjian, Lan Yu seemed to have turned into a maid, pouring tea for Fang Xinjian. She was as close to him as a kitten. Her gaze when looking at Fang Xinjian was filled with gentleness. It was as if she had placed all her emotions on Fang Xinjian. Moreover, she was wearing a long robe with a split in the middle, revealing a pair of slender and fair long legs. They looked as if they were glowing with the color of flesh. If any man were to be treated and observed in such a manner by such a great beauty, they would probably have strange thoughts in their hearts. Moreover, such a beauty was a divine-level expert. This would make one feel an endless desire to conquer her, as well as a sense of satisfaction. However, Fang Xinjian knew that this lady was very scheming. Lan Yu's fawning over her was just a disguise. If Fang Xinjian was an ordinary person, she would have probably smacked Fang Xinjian to death a long time ago. Seeing that Fang Xinjian had put down the manual in his hands, Lan Yu said in a gentle voice, "Sir, do you still want other manuals?" Fang Xinjian smiled and did not say anything. Instead, He looked at the blue sacred moonlight, who had turned into a light sphere and was floating in the air. He asked, "Where's the formation you used the other day?" "I want to take a look." The blue sacred moonlight's expression had been gloomy to begin with, and when she heard what Fang Xinjian said, she was so infuriated that her brows furrowed. "That's a secret of our full moon shrine. We definitely won't let outsiders see it." Fang Xinjian flicked his fingers and said calmly, "You wanted to kill me, and I'm already being very merciful by sparing your life. If you're not going to cooperate, then I can only waste some effort and wipe out the full moon shrine." The blue sacred moonlight's expression kept on changing. However, sensing Fang Xinjian's killing intent, she was unable to say anything to reject him. Lan Yu immediately said, "Grandmother, just tell the Lord. Otherwise, with the Lord's talent, he might be able to discover the profoundness after scanning through the entire Mingyue Mountains setup." The blue sacred moonlight let out a long sigh, appearing very dejected. At the next moment, a tremendous amount of information was sent into Fang Xinjian's mind. It was the contents of the Mingyue Mountains formation. It included a set of methods on how to absorb the will fragments of ordinary people, store them, and convert them into willpower. Not bad. Fang Xinjian nodded inwardly. With this set of formation, the prowess of the celestial eradication sword formation can be increased by another 10%. It's a pity that the rate at which this formation accumulates power is too slow. Without decades or centuries of accumulation, it won't be able to unleash its true prowess. Just as Fang Xinjian was focused on studying the full moon shrine's manuals, the first prince was sitting in a horse carriage. The muscles throughout his body kept on moving up and down as he silently cultivated his physical body. He was cultivating the training and nurturing techniques that apprentices cultivated from the very beginning. A short while later, the horse carriage came to a stop. Someone helped the first prince down, and they walked into a pavilion. In the pavilion, there was a middle-aged man with a full beard. His long hair draped over his back casually. Although he was dressed very casually, he still appeared to be very graceful and noble. Seeing the first prince's arrival, he pointed to the seat in front of him and said, "Sit, uncle." The first prince nodded and sat down. The middle-aged man whom he addressed as uncle was the current sect master of the ancient path of hell and one of the Empire's 10 divine-level experts, the Abyss Lord. Looking at the first prince's appearance, the corners of the Abyss Lord's lips curled up slightly, revealing a hint of a smile. "Not bad. You don't seem to be dispirited. Why? Are you blaming us for not avenging you?" The first prince shook his head. Although he only had the powers of an ordinary person, he gave off an unfathomable feeling. Even the Abyss Lord felt that it was a little strange. The first prince said, "Father and uncle, of course you have your reasons. Moreover, this is my own vengeance. I'll avenge myself." The Abyss Lord nodded. "In at most 2 months' time, the evil god summoning ritual will begin. You should make your preparations. As for Fang Xinjian, your father has made arrangements for him. You don't have to worry about him for now." Chapter 625. In a secret room at the peak of the Mingyue Mountain, Fang Xinjian's physical body was sitting cross-legged on the ground without making a single sound. His breathing and heartbeat were almost non-existent, as if he was dead. Above his head, a lump of black light and shadow kept on flashing. It was like the ghosts and spirits of legends, twisting and changing incessantly. This was Fang Xinjian's deathly sword intent. After seeing the full moon shrine's Moonlight King physique and the mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's Sunluo Six Heavens sword physique, he had tried to integrate the two methods of condensing martial will to create his own path. With his aptitude of having the world's top sword arts talent and the aptitude of having 10 levels of the mystical prince, it was naturally a piece of cake for him. However, after many attempts, he still felt a little dissatisfied. It's still lacking a little bit of variation. The sturdiness of the Sunluo Six Heavens sword physique, and the agility of the Moonlight King physique can all be integrated into my heaven-connecting sword physique. However, my martial will still needs to be able to unleash endless power. The method of condensing martial will that Fang Xinjian had created during this period of time was called the heaven-connecting sword physique. He wanted to make this method of condensing martial will have both sturdiness, power, and speed at the same time. However, in terms of power, he was still unable to unleash the abilities of his martial will. The power of the natural world is naturally the power of the stars under our feet. Fang Xinjian thought of the prodigious astral divine powers waves that he had cultivated in the past, as well as the Terra ingurgitation technique. It'll be great if my martial will can make use of gravity, or even if my celestial eradication sword formation can also make use of gravity. It was true that the power of the stars, or gravity, was one of the strongest powers in the world. However, Fang Xinjian had not obtained the related method of condensing martial will. It was not impossible for him to create his own method. However, he thought of a better idea. Fang Xinjian walked out of the secret room and saw Lan Yu, who was kneeling at the side. He asked, "Are you familiar with the Myriad Stars Palace? Do they have any powerful methods of condensing martial will?" During this period of time, Lan Yu had been accompanying Fang Xinjian. She appeared to be extremely obedient, just like a maidservant. In fact, Fang Xinjian knew that if he said it out loud, she might even offer herself to sleep with him. This was a woman who would do anything to achieve her goals. She had nothing to do with the kind and gentle appearance she had. Lan Yu was a little puzzled as to why Fang Xinjian would ask this. However, as a powerful faction that was also established in the Xingwu region, like the Full Moon Shrine, Lan Yu was naturally very familiar with the Myriad Stars Palace. She nodded and said, "All of the Myriad Stars Palace's legacies come from a universal astral realm book. The method they use to condense their martial will is called the astral spiritual physique. It gathers the geomagnetic forces and martial will, and its power is the most vigorous and majestic." Fang Xinjian nodded and thought to himself, "So that's how it is." As a faction that represented the stars, the Myriad Stars Palace would naturally have martial arts that allowed them to grasp the powers of the stars. Fang Xinjian said, "Then let's go. Bring me to the Myriad Stars Palace." Lan Yu said hesitantly, "Sir, you're thinking of taking a look at the Universal Astral Realm book." The Myriad Stars Palace was over 1,000 lis away from the Full Moon Shrine. They were located on the east and west sides of the Xingwu region. In the center of a huge hill was a mountain that was over 1,000 meters tall. The mountain looked like a huge rock that had been thrown onto the ground. In fact, it was very close. It was because this mountain was rumored to have been a shooting star in the sky. Countless years ago, the experts of the Myriad Stars Palace had grabbed it from the starry sky and thrown it onto the land of the Xingwu region. Therefore, a stretch of mountain range was blasted into a huge crater, and after countless years, it became the hills that it was now. The shooting star turned into a huge mountain, constantly emitting streams of weak astral radiation. It supported the cultivation of the generations of knights of the Myriad Stars Palace, and it was known as the Xingwang Mountain. Right now, with the Xingwang Mountain as the center, the countless towns and villages in the hills all belonged to the Myriad Stars Palace's businesses. It could be said that the Myriad Stars Palace was the true local tyrant here. The words of the Myriad Stars Palace's knights were much more effective than those of the Empire's officials. Right now, at the foot of the Myriad Stars Palace's mountain, several tens of people of various appearances were waiting quietly, waiting for the Myriad Stars Palace to summon them. They were the representatives of the various trade associations, factions, and various organizations within the Myriad Stars Palace's sphere of influence. These representatives would often come here to ask for instructions from the Myriad Stars Palace, request for assistance, or pay a visit to a supervisor of the Myriad Stars Palace, or present gift. A cute young lady of about 14 or 15 years of age, with blonde hair tied into a ponytail and a round face, was also standing there. Next to her was a middle-aged man who looked somewhat similar to her. The middle-aged man said to her, "Maria, remember this. After you go up to the Xingwang mountain, you must work hard in your cultivation and listen to teacher. Don't casually create trouble. There are too many important characters on the mountain, and our clan can't afford to offend any of them." The young lady who was called Maria nodded and said seriously, "I understand, father. I'll work hard in my cultivation." Maria's father had put in a lot of effort, spent several 10,000 gold, and almost depleted all of his resources before finally finding a disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace who was willing to take his daughter in as an apprentice. As long as she could join the Myriad Stars Palace, she would be able to do whatever she wanted within a range of 100 lis. Moreover, there was also the Myriad Stars Palace's martial arts legacy, which was a supreme manual with a limitless future. At the thought of this, Maria's father looked at his daughter, Maria, with eyes filled with anticipation. Just as everyone was patiently waiting for the summons from the Myriad Stars Palace, a man and a lady appeared at the foot of the mountain. Maria rubbed her eyes, looked at the man and lady, and said in astonishment, "Father, were the two of them there earlier? Why didn't I see them appear?" Maria's father shook his head, indicating that he had not seen how the two of them had appeared either. It was a man and a woman. The man looked ordinary, even a little pale and skinny. The woman, on the other hand, looked graceful and charming. However, she was looking at the skinny man with a tender and sweet expression, causing many of the men present to feel an instinctive displeasure. The man and lady were Fang Xinjian and Lan Yu. Lan Yu said in a gentle voice, "Sir, this seems to be the Myriad Stars Palace. From today onward, there's no need to call me sir." Fang Xinjian's eyes flashed with a vast aura that seemed like the circulation of the universe. "There's a difference in strength between people, but there's no such thing as superiority or inferiority. Regardless of whether it's me or you, we're just a speck of dust in the long river of time. You can just call me Fang Xinjian." He then looked at Lan Yu and asked once again, "Are you sure this time around?" Lan Yu's face turned red, and she stuck out her tongue a little embarrassedly, causing one's imagination to run wild. "I'm sorry, Xing Jian. I don't come out often, and I'm not too familiar with the terrain either. However, this should be the Myriad Stars Palace. I'll just ask around." As she said that, she turned to look at the people waiting at the foot of the mountain. Her expression changed from one of tenderness to one of coldness. "Is this the Myriad Stars Palace?" Chapter 626. Seeing how Lan Yu had turned around to ask questions, most of the men present felt giddy. It was because she was too beautiful. There were not many beauties like Lan Yu even in the entire empire. Among the many beauties Fang Xinjian had seen before, only Audrey, who came from the northern ice region, could be a match for her. Therefore, after hearing Lan Yu's words, the few men immediately fought to be the first to reply, "Yes, yes, yes. This is the Myriad Stars Palace. Why has Miss come to the Myriad Stars Palace? My uncle is a disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace. If there's anything, he might be able to help." It was a pity that Lan Yu did not even throw a glance at them. She looked at Fang Xinjian and said obediently, "It should be here." Seeing how she was treating Fang Xinjian so amiably, it was as if she was a completely different person from how cold she was earlier. This made everyone feel even more displeased with Fang Xinjian. Fang Xinjian nodded and said, "Let's go up and take a look." With that, he walked toward the Myriad Stars Palace's mountain gate. Lan Yu said hesitantly, "Go up? Sir Xinjian, aren't we going to inform them?" Fang Xinjian seemed to be exuding an indifferent aura, giving off a feeling that he was becoming more and more illusory. He said calmly, "It's too troublesome to report our names right from the start. Let's take a look first." Lan Yu was stunned for a moment before she reacted. She threw a somewhat sorrowful glance at the Myriad Stars Palace. For Fang Xinjian to go up without reporting his name, it was as if he was intentionally trying to scam the Myriad Stars Palace. Only someone with Fang Xinjian's abilities and reputation would be able to do something like this. If ordinary people were to do this, they would probably be suppressed to death by the Myriad Stars Palace. Lan Yu shook her head and followed Fang Xinjian toward the Myriad Stars Palace's mountain gate. She even changed her appearance slightly. The tip of her nose, the corners of her eyes, and her lips had some slight changes. Although there was not much of a difference, no one would be able to associate her with Lan Yu's identity. It was because a dark joy suddenly rose in her heart. It was not a bad thing for the Myriad Stars Palace, their old rival, to be scammed by Fang Xinjian. However, they had only taken a few steps when a person who looked like a young master blocked their way. The man wore black and red formal attire. Every button and ring on his body exuded an air of nobility. His short, black hair was combed neatly. Walking up to Fang Xinjian, he bowed slightly, putting on an aristocratic etiquette. He wore an elegant and polite smile as he looked at Lan Yu and said, "Beautiful miss, you can't barge into the Myriad Stars Palace recklessly. You'll have to queue up to be summoned before you can enter. My uncle is the palace's third-generation disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace." "What young you said?" After the man finished speaking, he still had a confident and superior smile on his face, doing his best to display his aristocratic demeanor. All of his attention was focused on Lan Yu. "If I were to miss out on such a beauty, I'll probably not be able to come across her again in my lifetime." The young master threw a glance at Fang Xinjian from the corner of his eyes, and he felt even more superior. Even this guy is able to get close to this beauty. My advantage should only be greater. However, just as he was thinking this, Lan Yu threw him a cold glance and said, "Scram?" The aristocratic young master was stunned for a moment, as if he could not react to Lan Yu's change. "Young miss, you might have misunderstood." A short moment later, the aristocratic young master frowned. "I'm only giving you a friendly reminder. Why must you speak so viciously to me?" Just then, Fang Xinjian suddenly turned his head in surprise and looked at the golden-haired young lady, Maria. A hint of a strange gleam flashed in his eyes, which were like glazed gemstones. Under Lan Yu's astonished gaze, Fang Xinjian slowly walked up to Maria and touched Maria's head. Throughout the entire process, an aura that was like the circulation of the heavenly laws and the vast universe extended out into the surroundings. Everything seemed so natural. Everyone looked at this scene in a daze, as if everything was as it should be. No one stepped out to stop it, not even Maria's father. Fang Xinjian looked at the dazed Maria and suddenly asked, "Young lady, are you interested in becoming my student?" As Fang Xinjian spoke, that vast aura immediately dissipated without a trace. Maria seemed to have reacted to it. She immediately shook her head and said, "No way, no way. I'm here to become a disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace. I can't be your student." Maria's father also reacted to it. Although it was obvious that Fang Xinjian and Lan Yu were not ordinary people, in this middle-aged man's opinion, no matter how powerful they were, how could they possibly be a match for the Myriad Stars Palace? Therefore, he rejected politely yet firmly, "I'm sorry, sir. Maria has already made an appointment with a teacher from the Myriad Stars Palace. I'm afraid that she won't be able to be your student." Fang Xinjian shook his head. "It's fine. I was just struck by a sudden impulse." Fang Xinjian was right. It was true that he had been struck by the sudden inspiration and had followed his feelings to want to take Maria in as his disciple. As for why and what kind of benefits there would be, he himself was unable to say for sure. Ever since he had gained the sudden inspiration ability, Fang Xinjian had encountered many such situations. He would be able to sense some of the specific situations, while he would only have a blurry feeling for others. However, there would usually not be any harm in following his feelings. Lan Yu walked up to Feng Xinjian, and her martial kept on scanning Maria's physical body. It was as if she was curious about what this little girl had done to make Feng Xinjian take the initiative to take her in as his disciple. Hearing Maria's and the middle-aged man's replies, Lan Yu shook her head, exclaiming that the two of them had eyes but failed to see, not caring about the treasure before them. Hearing that aristocratic young master smirked coldly. There are all sorts of people who cheat and swindle in this world. She's a genius who's going to join the Myriad Stars Palace. Can you not hold up her future? Feng Xinjian looked toward that aristocratic young master, but the other party glared back at him without showing any signs of weakness. Why? Am I wrong? You're still thinking of snatching a disciple from the Myriad Stars Palace? How audacious of you! Recalling how Lan Yu had treated him with disdain earlier, he vented all his fury onto Feng Xinjian. Just then, an elderly female voice rang out from the mountain. That's right. It's really audacious of you to snatch a disciple from our Myriad Stars Palace. The first word was still vague and illusory, but the last word was already close at hand. A middle-aged woman wearing a blue robe with countless silver spots of light flickering on it, just like starlight, descended from the sky, bringing with her a strong gust of wind. Maria's father said in pleasant surprise, "Master Crystal, you're here?" Maria, quickly greet the master. Maria nodded somewhat cautiously. Chapter 6:27. That lady nodded a little arrogantly toward Maria's father, but her eyes were still looking sideways at Feng Xinjian. She said, "Young man, don't be so arrogant just because you have some abilities. Who is your master? Today, I'm going to teach you a lesson on his behalf so that you won't keep spouting nonsense outside. If that happens, you won't even know how you died." Everyone present looked at Master Crystal with great respect, but when they looked at Feng Xinjian, they sighed inwardly. He was bragging at the foot of the Myriad Stars Palace's mountain, and he just so happened to be caught by the Myriad Stars Palace's second-generation disciple. He was really extremely unlucky. The Myriad Stars Palace's several generations of disciples were constantly being replaced. The current first-generation disciples referred to the Myriad Stars Palace's divine-level expert, the astral ancestor, as well as his peers. The second-generation disciples referred to people like Crystal. This was especially so for Crystal. She was the astral ancestor's disciple. Thinking of how such an important character was going to come down personally to receive a female disciple who had yet to join the sect, everyone immediately turned their gazes to Maria, who had been inconspicuous previously. It seemed that this girl might be an important character in the Myriad Stars Palace in the future. That aristocratic young master also smiled inwardly and shook his head, sighing inwardly at Feng Xinjian's bad luck. What a pitiful kid! To think that he wants to take in a future female disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace as his student right in front of the Myriad Stars Palace. I really don't know if he's ignorant or foolish. This old woman is famous for her violent temper. I think that even if this kid doesn't die, he'll be in deep trouble. Everyone shook their heads and sighed. The middle-aged and elderly people were already planning on telling this matter to their juniors when they went back. They would have to be careful when they were outside in the future. Otherwise, they would end up like this young man, offending the Myriad Stars Palace just because of a single sentence. This was a ready-made example of bad luck. Feng Xinjian threw a glance at Crystal and shook his head. "You're getting on in years and you're not even a demigod. It seems that you haven't learned much, but you have quite a lot of stupid rules." Crystal's eyes opened abruptly like an enraged lion. Her aura surged, and everyone in the surroundings could sense killing intent gushing toward them. Maria's father felt bitter inwardly. Is this kid courting death? How could he offend a level 29 powerhouse like this? Damn it, I must explain it clearly to the Grandmaster later. He must not take his anger out on Maria and affect Maria's future. Huh! Fang Shijian looked at Crystal coldly. As soon as Crystal unleashed her raging aura, Fang Shijian's palm had already pressed on her shoulder. With a loud bang, the female knight who was awe-inspiring just a moment ago was now like a toy. She knelt on the ground as if her body had fallen apart. Her face was flushed, and the air around her surged as if she was struggling to stand up. At the same time, Fang Xinjian's voice softly sounded in her ears. "If you're not convinced, then kneel until you are." In that instant, the ground under Crystal's knees shattered inch by inch, and she sank 3 inches into the ground. It was as if a mountain was pressing down on her as she knelt down before Fang Xinjian. Forces surged throughout her body, but she was unable to move at all. Her eyes were bloodshot from agitation, but she was still unable to move her muscles at all. She felt as if her physical body had been separated from her consciousness, and she could only kneel there silently. As a second-generation disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace, Crystal was used to being arrogant and domineering in the Xingwu region. When had she ever been forced to kneel down? This level of humiliation was as if a knife had pierced fiercely into her heart. She glared at Fang Xinjian, wanting to say something but realizing that she was unable to say a single word. She could only continue to stare at Fang Xinjian, as if wanting to carve Fang Xinjian's appearance deeply into her mind. However, she was nowhere in Fang Xinjian's heart. He did not even remember her name or appearance. His actions were so casual, but the people around him were shocked to the core. Although everyone was a little surprised at the abilities that Fang Xinjian had displayed, they were even more astonished that he had actually attacked and humiliated a second-generation disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace. This guy has gone mad. To think that he would attack someone from the Myriad Stars Palace here. This be *starred. If the old ancestor were to pin the blame on him, even we might have to be punished. Everyone looked at Fang Xinjian in both fear and fury, feeling that they were really unlucky to have gotten involved in such an undeserved calamity. However, Fang Xinjian did not care about what these people were thinking. He merely turned and walked toward the Xingwang mountain. Lan Yu followed behind Fang Xinjian like an obedient maid. It was only then that the young master who had mocked Fang Xinjian earlier broke out in cold sweat. Thankfully, Fang Xinjian did not seem to think much of him and did not make a move against him. Otherwise, with his abilities that were not even at the second transition, he would have been killed with a single slap. However, at the thought of how Fang Xinjian and Lan Yu had disregarded him, he felt even more aggrieved and furious. The crowd at the side had already surrounded Crystal, wanting to help her up. "Master Crystal, we'll help you up. It's all that wild kid who came from God knows where. Master, please don't blame us. We don't know him at all." However, no matter who went up and how much strength they exerted, they were unable to budge Crystal at all. A stream of deathly sword intent from Fang Xinjian was left on Crystal's body. It was like a MT tie pressing down on her. It was not a power that they could go up against. Just then, a fatso at the side was so anxious that he was drenched in sweat. He said, "What should we do now? Should we chase after them and take a look?" "Chase after them and take a look? That kid seems to be an expert. What if they end up fighting and we end up getting injured? Do you guys think that everything will be fine just by waiting here?" Maria's father's countenance was grim as he looked at Crystal, who was still kneeling down and not moving. He said calmly, "Maria, follow me to stop that guy. We mustn't let him humiliate the Myriad Stars Palace." With that, he dragged Maria and chased after them. The few people at the side were stunned for a moment. Some of them reacted and gave chase as well. A few of them also reacted and shouted, "We'll stay here and take care of Master Crystal." The aristocratic young master raised his brows and thought, "That's right. We're all considered to be external influences of the Myriad Stars Palace. It's one thing if we can't fight them, but it's another thing if we don't put in any effort. That kid is courting death. He'll definitely die in the Myriad Stars Palace." No matter what, we must chase after him and put on an act. Otherwise, if we were to be accused of being incompetent or having ulterior motives, we'll be the ones to suffer. Therefore, the young master's eyes flickered and he chased after Feng Xinjian. Humph, to dare to create trouble in the myriad stars palace. I want to see how you're going to die. Feng Xinjian and Lan Yu walked slowly on the mountain path. The two of them could sense the people who were following them from a few hundred meters behind them, but neither of them paid any heed to them. Lan Yu was just waiting to watch a good show, while Feng Xinjian had half of his attention on cultivating his sword art. How could he possibly care about what those people were thinking? Chapter 6:28. After the two of them had walked up over 300 steps, an explosive bellow rang out, accompanied by several tens of tornadoes descending from the sky. How dare you barge in? Before the words were finished, Feng Xinjian slapped out across space with his palm. There seemed to be a crackling sound ringing out, and the silhouette in the tornadoes tumbled in midair, turning into a black dot in midair, and flying out for an unknown number of kilometers. The people in the forest behind them felt their hearts palpitate. Maria's father gulped and said, "That person seems to be the Myriad Stars Palace's third-generation disciple, Arts?" Superstar God Arts can be considered an outstanding talent among the third-generation disciples. His talent is above that of Crystal's, and his abilities even surpass hers. To think that he can't even take a single attack from him? Everyone exchanged a glance and subconsciously put over 100 meters away from Feng Xinjian. After casually slapping away a few more disciples who were on guard, Feng Xinjian and Lan Yu did not encounter any more enemies. They walked to the mountainside of Xingwang Mountain without any obstructions and saw several tens of Myriad Stars Palace's disciples standing guard in the huge training ground. The 2 men and 1 woman in the lead had seething auras, and there were faint auras of over 1,000 specialty seeds seething in the surroundings. The physical particles in their bodies were linked up by violent heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces, and their strength far surpassed that of ordinary conferred night. Feng Xinjian threw them a slight glance. With how powerful his martial will was, checking out the trio's abilities was as easy as reading the lines on his palm. He instantly determined that the 3 of them were probably demigods with 1 or 2 tiers of perfection. The 2 men and 1 woman were the 3 most outstanding second-generation disciples of the Myriad Stars Palace. The oldest among them had the nickname of the Lone Star Knight. He was a demigod with 2 tiers of perfection in his physical body and specialty seed. He would be able to dominate in any region. Beside him were his junior martial sister, the Stardust Fairy, and his junior martial brother, the Star Beast Hunter. At the sight of Feng Xinjian and Lan Yu, the Lone Star Knight's countenance changed slightly as well. Lan Yu's beauty was so great that even he could not help but feel astonished. Moreover, Lan Yu gave off a familiar feeling. However, when he tried to sense it in detail, it was very blurry and he could not get a clear feeling. However, someone had barged into Xingwang Mountain and several of their disciples had been injured. No matter what, they could not just let this matter rest. The Lone Star Knight walked out, looked at Feng Xinjian, and said, "May I know who you are? Why did you barge into our Myriad Stars Palace and injure our disciples?" The Star Beast Hunter at the side laughed coldly, and the marble-like muscles on his body twitched. Many wild beasts formed from starlight roared uneasily behind him. "Eldest senior brother, why are you wasting your breath on him? Just kill this kind of person. There's no need to talk so much." The Lone Star Knight threw a fierce glare at him, and then turned to look at Feng Xinjian. It was true that he had the best temper, and was the most level-headed out of the 3 of them. Even if Feng Xinjian were to come knocking on their door, he would still want to get to the bottom of Feng Xinjian's background first. In his opinion, as long as Feng Xinjian was not a fool, it would be impossible for him to come knocking on their door like this. For Fang Xinjian to dare to come knocking on their door alone, he must have some sort of backing. It was just that their Myriad Stars Palace was not afraid. The Stardust Fairy said proudly, "You're the one who sent a letter saying that you want to challenge our Myriad Stars Palace, right? To think that there's really someone with such guts. Tell us who you are, or who the person behind you is, and we can spare your life." However, Fang Xinjian flicked his fingers and frowned slightly. The other party seemed to have mistaken him for someone else. However, he did not mind and merely said calmly, "I don't know who you're talking about. There's no need for you to ask for my name, nor do you need to know who I am. The reason I've come to the Xingwang Mountain today is to borrow the Universal Astral Realm book to take a look. As long as you let me take a look, I'll turn around and leave." Hearing Fang Xinjian's words, many of the Myriad Stars Palace's disciples present were infuriated. What was the Universal Astral Realm book? It was the Myriad Stars Palace's secret manual, the source of all the martial arts in the Myriad Stars Palace. It was something that only the Myriad Stars Palace's leader could read. For an outsider to just casually come over and want to borrow it to take a look was no different from someone peeing on the Myriad Stars Palace's signboard. If they were to let someone read the Universal Astral Realm book so casually, then the people from the Myriad Stars Palace would no longer be able to go out in the future. They would be utterly humiliated. The Lone Star Knight thought that he was already very polite, but he was still so infuriated by the other party's words that his face turned pale. He let out a cold laugh in a restrained manner and said calmly, "The Universal Astral Realm book is our Myriad Stars Palace's secret. It's impossible for us to lend it to outsiders. 3 days ago, you sent a letter over, saying that you want to challenge our Myriad Stars Palace. Yet now, you're saying that you want to borrow our Myriad Stars Palace's secret, the Universal Astral Realm book? Are you really going to fight to the death with our Myriad Stars Palace? Is that so?" "I'm not the one who wrote the letter. I just came here on a whim." Fang Xinjian's eyes emitted waves of indifferent aura. It was as if there was some kind of terrifying power slowly emerging from his body. The feeling that he gave off also changed from his originally weak and harmless appearance to an indescribable sense of danger. "There's no point in talking too much. In the end, we'll still have to fight to see who's stronger. Then take a sword attack from me. With so many of you joining forces, if there's someone who can take a sword attack from me, it's nothing much for me to let the Myriad Stars Palace off." Hearing this, the Lone Star Knight and the others from the Myriad Stars Palace felt that Fang Xinjian was extremely arrogant and putting on airs. How many people were there here? There were several tens of the most elite disciples. Among them, there were over 20 who had reached the second transition, 7 or 8 who had reached level 29, and the Lone Star Knight, the Stardust Fairy, and the Starbeast Hunter. The 3 of them were demigods with 2 or 1 tier of perfection. With such strength, they would be able to stir up a storm in any of the great regions. They would even be more than enough to set up a first-rate faction. The Stardust Fairy looked at Fang Xinjian with an amused expression and said, "Defeat us with a single sword attack? Who do you think you are? The Abyss Lord or the Holy Orison?" It was not just the people from the Myriad Stars Palace. Even Maria's father, and the others who were following behind felt that Fang Xinjian's words were extremely arrogant. To be able to defeat 3 demigods and over 10 conferred knights with a single sword attack. Probably only a divine-level expert would be able to do this. Maria's father took a long look at Fang Xinjian and said, "This person is either a lunatic who is so arrogant that he's ignorant or a divine-level expert." "Divine-level expert?" Maria cried out in astonishment. "Father, you're saying that he's a divine-level expert? It's just a 1 in 10,000 possibility." When Maria's father said this, he also smiled. How can there be such a coincidence? Recently, the ether particle density has been increasing tremendously. There's no lack of arrogant young geniuses. Fang Xinjian's expression became increasingly indifferent, as if no one could attract his attention anymore. He said calmly, "Between the Abyss Lord and the Holy Orozen and me, we'll only know who's stronger and who's weaker after we fight. Alright, cut the crap. Take my sword attack." The Stardust Fairy still wanted to say something, but as a deathly sword intent rose up from Feng Xinjian's body, the countenances of the Stardust Fairy, the Lone Star Knight, and the Star Beast Hunter instantly changed drastically. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.